Is this where we talk about Super Tuesday?
Oh my God. Fucking Biden.
Oh man.
Sleepy Joe done woke up.
Yep. Well, he's still sleepy. He's never gonna not be sleepy.
There's music.
Dude, that music. So relaxing.
Oh yeah. Putting the bat signal out. Stand by.
Dave, do you need us to record locally or
Nope.
are you handling that?
No locals.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
That's what I like to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot easier, isn't it?
Why don't we do that all the time?
Because it wouldn't sound so sweet on the podcast. This isn't going on the
That's
podcast.
Oh, that's cute.
Not even like a Slack exclusive.
I mean, it'll be on YouTube, but
Yeah. Why not? Why wouldn't you put this on the podcast? Might as well.
I might just put the stream on it, like, you know, if we need a week off, which we might.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Looks like everything's here. Tokyo Megaplex is here.
Oh yeah. You should have been on too.
So many
Talk
people.
about Indigo and all the
I
other
know.
crazy. He'll just hit us with comments from
Well, we
Peanut
we
Gallery,
talked
though.
about that a couple days ago.
Yeah.
He talked about some Indigo.
Oh, cool.
We told him he should listen to this because there'll be a lot of nice, interesting convo here. I'm gonna go to our faces now. Hello, Governor. There we are.
All right.
Oh man, I don't even know where to start. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a Mograph late night render special. I'm Dave, and let's just go down and everybody introduce themselves because it's easier that way, and I can just sit here and drink my Red Bull. Starting to my right.
Who's to your right? Oh,
All
Raphael.
right. I guess so. Yeah.
There's so many screens.
Okay, hi peeps here. Should I introduce? What should I introduce? I'm not sure.
Your website, what you do, stuff like that, for people who haven't met you before.
Right. Okay. So my name is Raphael Rau. I'm also known as Silverwing in the Interspheres, and my website is silverwing-vfx.de. It's German. I'm vodcasting from Germany live today. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, so you don't expect much of me. And yeah, so I'm doing all sorts of rendering, so mostly Octane, but I'm interested in all sorts of renderers, and that's my sort of specialty, so doing shading and testing renderers. All right, next.
All right. I'm David Ariew. My site is arievisuals.com. I like me some Octane. Going to be representing Octane with Raphael here. And what else? I do concert visuals. I do short films that are overly ambitious CG projects, and I do tutorials for the interwebs.
And you're Octane Jesus.
I guess I am. I'm trying to be again. I've got my
According
hair
to
growing
the internet.
longer and longer. According to the internet,
Mm-hmm.
my name is Octane Cheese. It's funny how often that comes up in client meetings too. Like just today, I'm like on the phone with these clients that I don't know very well. They're from or they're in LA. They're Wyden and Kennedy, and they're like, we hear you're named Octane Jesus. I'm like,
You're like, ooh.
ooh,
That's great.
it happens a lot.
And then I'm Billy Chitkin, aka Gurnge on the internet. Freelancer out of Detroit. Work with a bunch of my friends. We go by the name Box Fort.
Woo.
That's our little kind of collective thing. So we're doing all that, making stuff each month, trying to figure out where we are in the freelance verse. Maybe we're a company, maybe we're not. Who knows? Stay tuned. and a big Redshift user. So
Nice. I'm Chad Ashley. I work at Grayscale Gorilla. I'm a creative director there. I make materials, I make plugins, I make training, and hopefully make all of your jobs much easier.
It's definitely true.
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I use them all.
Yeah,
I
you
use
do.
them all.
Yeah.
You're a render hoe, is what you are.
I'm a render slut.
You're a
Oh,
render
no.
slut. I said it.
Yeah.
I said it.
Oh man. All
I
right.
really am. It's really sad, but that's the truth.
Well, I think we should probably start with Octane. I think it's a good place to start because you've all used it before. Some of you still use it, some of you don't use it anymore. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation. When did everybody start using it?
Ooh, 2013 for me, on a Dave Matthews Band music video. When I didn't know what any of the settings were, I hit a button that created a glossy texture, and it said Octagloss, and I thought that was a thing. I was like, I made an Octagloss.
An Octagloss.
Yeah.
Let's make
yeah.
it a thing.
What's that?
Oh man.
Let's
Yeah, there
make
you
it
go.
a thing.
Yeah, make it a thing.
Yeah,
I
for
want
me
to
it's
say.
like,
Sorry. Go ahead.
I started with an early beta version, I think, of Octane. It wasn't inside of Cinema 4D yet, so I started with version 0.8 or something. So you had to
Wow.
export OBJs to it from Cinema 4D.
Damn. You got in early. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I probably got a late start in comparison to most. I think my first build was like 2.21, maybe somewhere in the 2014, 2015 range. But I really haven't touched it in production since 307, I want to say. That's when I jumped ship, so I will pass.
Yeah, I think Raph has the wins
Yeah,
for the
he wins.
earliest.
Dave,
I
how
think
about
I
you?
was like, I don't know, I was like 2014 too. I think 2015, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think it was 2013 or 14 for me. But it was kind of, David, you were doing this in a scenario where you, like you said, you're like just throwing things together to see what it does, and I think that's what the
Yeah.
appeal was, because I was working in
Yeah, it was
standard
totally
render.
the Wild
and-
West.
Yeah, I just happened to have the right kind of video card to do it, though. If I didn't,
Yeah, I was
you know.
still on a Mac as well. I was on a Mac Pro.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I convinced my company to get one of those Quadros or something, like $2,000 card, and
yeah.
it was like I was like, oh, this is so fast, but I had no idea that the gaming cards would have been so much better and so
Yeah.
much cheaper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Back when I started, I had a GTX 580, I think. It had glorious 1.2 gigabytes of VRAM.
Nice. Wow, I can't even imagine that the scene would like run out so fast with only 1.2 gigs. That's insane. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had.
But I think it had, because it didn't have that many features, it didn't
Right, it
use
didn't
that much
use as
in
much.
Core before, yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy how far we've come in just like a few years. Yeah.
And that GPU stuff started to take off, and then we started hearing about, Redshift and other GPU renders, and everything just went nuts, and dailies went all over the place, and finally you can kind of see things in near real time, which was a game changer. Back when I was doing it, making logos back at this agency, it was just all standard, and you'd have to change, one tick or one dial or one setting, and then wait like 10 minutes and whatnot. And so it really changed a lot of things, but now there's so many choices. I think what's happening is people are just who are new are not sure what to get into. They don't know if they have the right gear. Some people don't know that they need to even have the right gear. Some people I see a lot of chats, from some people who are new in different forums and stuff, and they're like, "Hey, I just got Octane, and I've got this Radeon card, and it's not working right." And it's like, so there are so many things to consider, and everybody asks like, "What is the best render engine?" And it's such a vague question to ask because there are so many variables.
It's a personal question.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Yeah.
even ask me that.
Yeah.
The best engine
Private.
is
How dare you ask me that?
I think the best engine is Mental Ray,
Don't make this
Oh, yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah.
Dude,
Mantra.
can we just talk about Mental Ray for a second?
Yeah.
That renderer was pretty sick.
It
Yeah.
was honestly like it was the
sick.
first engine I learned in school. Like when I, really like took a focus on look dev and stuff. And like to this day, it's the only engine that I've used that out of the box has a light incidence node, so that you can like just directly pull the light angle, which is so useful because like Fresnel will pull the camera angle, which you can sometimes cheat if you like plug in a specific camera and you tie that camera to the Fresnel shader. Like you can hack that in Redshift, for example, but like just one node. And it's like,
Yeah.
man, Mental Ray has everything.
Yeah, that's actually
Yeah,
really
it was
useful.
ahead of its time for sure. And then the other one that I always think fondly about is Brazil. Did anybody ever use
What
Brazil?
is that?
Yes.
I've never heard of
I
Brazil.
remember Brazil.
It was, yeah, dude. It was made by a company called Splutterfish.
Splutterfish,
which
yeah.
is the most ridiculous name for a company ever. But they were, I think it was like 3ds Max only for a while,
Yeah.
and then they opened it up to Maya. But it was way ahead of its time as far as like a good like GI renderer goes. And I just remember it had a great feature back like when GI was so expensive that you're sort of trying to fake a lot of it with AO. Their AO would allow you to bake in bump. So if you had a bunch of textures in your scene, a lot of bump maps and whatnot, if typically if you do like an override of AO, you're just getting like a generic AO with no bump, right? And somehow they figured out a way to like get an AO pass with your entire scene's bumped intact, which as a nerd, I was like, oh, that's cool.
I had that on,
like
on
that.
3D Max.
Nice.
I remember the first time I saw it, and I'm like, okay, you can install a free version of this into 3D Max, and I put it in, and you just put a plane down and you put a sphere down, and like it just looked so good. That GI,
It was
that GI dough.
Yeah, it was very good. And then I went on the V-Ray. I got on the V-Ray train for years. The 3ds Max V-Ray train, the real V-Ray train. I just got to say that because the Cinema 4D one is not the real V-Ray.
Right.
No,
Right.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah. I still miss those features, man. They had some killer features.
I
Dude,
used
being
it
able
for a
to
while.
mouse control your buckets, it's just
Oh,
so
dude.
nice.
That was so killer.
You set your bucket size to like 32 by 32, and it might as well be a GPU engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it even did like region of interest. So you could set an object to be the region of interest. So it would only render that object, and if that object animated, it would still like the
Oh
buckets.
wow, it would track it.
Yeah, it would track it. So you
Oh,
weren't
that's cool.
you weren't rendering any. There was no wasted buckets.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy.
And so,
But yeah,
okay, so if somebody was
Yeah.
going to get into it for the first time and pick a render engine and wanted something generic though, what would they need to choose?
Pro Render,
Pro render.
right? No,
I disagree.
sorry.
That's just a joke, I guess.
I'm trying to lighten it up here.
No, Tokyo in the chat, he was talking about, if you start on something like Corona or Arnold, it's easier to just start with what you have because most likely whatever you have it might be slow, could at least run it, which is a good start.
Yeah, because I think we all take for granted the technical hurdles of GPU rendering, and we
That's
just
true.
because we've been dealing with it since the beginning, and we know like, oh, you got to have this kind of card and make sure your
Right.
drivers are up to date. But somebody new, like, and they've never even installed a graphics card before, that's intimidating as hell.
Mhm. That's true.
It's scary. Like I don't like it's bad enough like I have to use a PC, but now you're telling me I need to like open it up and like install cards. Like that's frightening to me.
Or build it from scratch, even worse.
Right. So I feel like CPU is a good sort of like onboarding rendering platform for sure.
Okay, but pretend the hardware is out of it. Like, which one do you feel would be the most accessible going in?
To a brand new person.
Yeah.
In what software? In Cinema?
Yeah. Let's say that.
I guess physical, right? I mean, it's the one that's there. They don't have to buy anything. It's in
Okay,
there.
okay, but say that money is also not. Say that they've got all the render engines. They just get to choose. Like, I mean, I personally, I think you could do any of them and start to learn, and each one has its own quirks. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the barrier of entry was zero, like you had the ultimate machine to be able to do anything you want.
Mhm.
You had the ultimate, money situation. Money's an
Right.
object. So purely if the criteria is just to learn, like I
Mhm.
need something to learn how this stuff works. I vote Arnold or Redshift probably.
I
And
feel like.
I would have
guess
said
Redshift.
Corona.
Oh, that's interesting.
Why is that?
It's pretty. It has a pretty like easy learning curve because there's not a lot of settings you can
Hmm.
or you need to
true.
tweak to get good
Right.
results. You can tweak them, but
Does it have even fewer settings than Octane? Because I feel like Octane has way fewer settings to tweak than Redshift or
when
Arnold.
when I started in Octane, it had
I
about three settings or something.
Right.
Yeah,
They've
Corona, I think
got
even
more.
uses all the standard materials and stuff too.
It
So
does.
like there's that.
It
Oh wow.
uses the standard material interface and it uses all of the standard like max on noises and all like
Hmm.
Fresnel. It's all the exact out of the box native stuff.
That's cool.
And if you want to go advanced, it has a node tree to get you further.
I guess I would ask that person like, what do you want to do?
Mhm.
Right.
Or
Like where do you want to go? Like what's your journey? Like what do you want to do here? And if they were like, oh man, I really want to do production. I want to like jump in and like light shots and do look dev. Then I would automatically say, okay, Arnold or Redshift for sure. I know if they said, I just want to make really pretty stuff. Like I don't care about like I just want to jump in and just like make some really sick looking renders. I'd say check out Octane. But
Right.
Hmm.
it'd be like whatever. I kind of tailor it. That's how I usually do it
There's
anyway.
people who are
So
wanting to get in.
when you say look dev, like what exactly do you mean? Because Octane can be very good for like quickly look deving things, and
Right.
For sure. And I think that's when I used Octane, that's what I was doing a lot of. I was doing boards, I was doing concept stuff, and it was great at that. But anytime I needed to move into production, like actually finishing shots, I couldn't use that program.
Hmm.
And
It was too unreliable, didn't have enough features, crashed too much. It's just there were so many hurdles that we've all lived through. So that's why I'm like, now that I think the rest of them have sort of caught up a little bit to Octane's ability to generate really sick imagery. My decision making goes more in the features and the ease of use. And those are sort of that's like my criteria, my top criteria for what I use.
why did they get to that point where so you said it crashed. You said what else that you were just saying like it wasn't production ready for you. That what is it like if you had too much stuff in a scene it would start to freak out? Was it the scalability? Like what was the exact
Yes.
So what
All of it.
I
Yeah,
guess
I mean,
what were
it
some of the
had
things you wanted it to have that it didn't have at the time?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that too.
so much stuff. So at the time, there was no custom AOVs. There was a really shitty AOV system. Let's see. There was a series.
Let's pretend you don't care about compositing very much too. Because you can
So that's
totally
why I
like
said like
all
if
of
you're
my jobs, like literally like all of my jobs, I do like maybe 5% compositing, like, and that's been happening for the past like 5 years. I almost never go to compositing anymore, you know. So like,
I guess that's if that's what your workflow is, then it opens you up to be able to do that. Like if that's your workflow, like if your
mhm,
workflow is like, oh, I don't really work on large team things, and I like whatever I spit out, I generally just tweak a little bit and then I'm good.
yeah,
Then if that's your workflow, then that opens you up to be able to do Octane in production.
mhm,
Like that, yeah, that makes sense.
right,
But for me, in the way that I like to work, I just love flexibility. I love it. And I want to be able to remain as flexible as I can all the way up until the very end of the job. Like, and when I was using Octane, one of the very, it's ironic, like the only engine that I've actually paid my own money for is Octane.
Oh
And
wow.
it was the first one that I actually like fell in love with.
I
And, like,
paid for
got me.
Octane at first, but yeah, now they give it to me. but
Yeah, it was
but
like,
now the only one I pay for is Redshift.
but yeah, I mean, I love the way Octane looks. Love it. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful right off the bat renderers that exist. But I cannot deal with the lack of features, the crashing, just the hoops that you have to jump through. And for me, that's just a deal breaker for me. But for other people, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Next. Go ahead.
I echo a lot of like what Chad said. I'm not as deep into like comp as he is, but just like overall stability and stuff. The last really time I used Octane in 307 was I had 980 Ti's, and
Mhm.
so with Windows 10, that leaves you with like 4 gigs and change VRAM, which was just like really not enough for me to push like as an artist the level that I was at, like what I wanted to push myself to do. I just kept hitting that ceiling, and then like the second the Redshift Alpha opened up, I was like, oh, sick, out of core. Like, all right, we're done here. Um,
So out of core works really well in Redshift because that is one of my gripes
Yeah.
with Octane is that out of
yeah,
core really doesn't work yet.
Mhm.
It theoretically works and it's worked in the live viewer a few times for me, but then whenever I go to the picture viewer, it just crashes.
Yeah,
It
it
doesn't really
crashes.
work.
Yeah.
right. And yeah,
I
and,
don't
and
think I've
that's
ever seen software crash as much as Octane. Like, and
That's
like,
harsh.
guys, like, I'm developing materials for all of them.
mhm.
So I
Huh.
have like a unique perspective and dealing and making plugins for them too. And by far, in all of the plugins that we've developed for third-party rendering, Octane gave us the most problems time and time again.
Well, when I
Huh.
look at some of those textures that you guys put in the everyday material collection, a lot of them use like default C4D noises. Like I see like tons of stacked C4D noises, and Octane hates that. Octane hates anytime you have something that's, C4D. Like it needs to be Octane native for it to be efficient.
I don't think there's any C40 noises in there. Which one
Mm.
are you talking about? Oh,
Everyday
maybe you're talking about the Texture Kit Pro, because I don't think I used
I'm
any.
talking about everyday material collection. Maybe I've got an
Oh,
older
really?
version of it, but yeah, like I found that
It's all
like
bitmap
half of the
based.
texture.
Yeah,
Weird.
that's
Okay,
what I
I
was
found
gonna
that
say.
like
That's what I thought.
I thought it. I
Yeah, it's
mean,
all
yeah,
bitmaps. And it's
weird.
using orbit files.
Maybe I have a weird version of it because like half of the textures for me come in with a bunch of like noises and other weird stuff versus ones that are just bitmap based work really well. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
hit me after, because I'm really
Yeah,
curious, because I that's news to me. I didn't I specifically made them bitmap based so that they would be easily
right.
portable.
Compatible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, that particular one, Billy helped convert those over to the different render engines. And yeah, as far as I know, there was no, when we did the conversions, there was
So he's
no
saying it's your fault,
noises on.
Billy. No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
I,
throwing you under the bus, Billy.
hey, I know who did the Octane one because I did Redshift.
Oh,
I'm not
that's
gonna,
right. Yeah, that's right. No, I
I'm
try.
not.
I'm curious if he snuck some in there without me knowing, we're gonna have a problem.
I
I'll look at
wanted
it
nothing.
afterwards. I need
I
to
wanted
download
nothing to
like
do with that conversion.
yeah, I need to download them from Plus, and maybe I've got like an out of date version, or maybe it's something weird. I'll check it out though and get back to you.
But it is an interesting thing. Like, people always ask me, like, why did you guys not do the same workflow for Octane that you did for Redshift and Arnold? And it's 100% on a toy. Like, I tried. Like, the whole idea of offloading textures to a separate directory and using like a universal path name doesn't work in Octane. Like, so if you take a
Oh.
material in Octane and you strip the file down, strip the texture name down just to the file name, and as long as it's mapped and Cinema sees it somewhere, it's all good, right? As soon as you drag that into the content browser to create a preset and you drag it back in, it freaks out. It gives you that preset slash blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah. I hit them up several times in the development of EMC, and I was like, hey, just so you know, like Arnold does it the right way, Redshift's doing it the right way. Could you guys maybe fix this, maybe? And they just didn't do it. They didn't. I'm not even sure if they wrote me back. And so yeah, it ended up being this other workflow, which I'm not super stoked on.
Yeah, I mean making that whole thing was like a complete R&D process because initially uh, it was like 100 gigs worth of bitmaps because it was all the full like uncompressed straight out of Substance stuff that Chad had kicked out. And like just logistically, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the GSG staff or whatever, but just like from a support ticket standpoint, asking users to download 100 gigs is just that's just crazy town. So we had to figure out this like whole crazy like you basically make the whole content browser library and then you make it again and then we were able to replace it with the compressed versions just so that it was like an easier kind of thing and the whole like orbx like just that was completely out the window
Right.
For whatever
Man.
and not to rag on Octane too much but I just as someone who did jump ship for a reason I just feel like that's like one of the little things that just it's always done its own thing. It's
Yeah.
like Octane, it's the Octane way.
Octane's the maverick, guys.
Now, see, I don't have as many crashes, and I don't, and I mean, I do have crashes. I have crashes and everything, but to me, sometimes I wonder, is it just because I'm more of a hardcore Octane user in general? Have
You know what's going on when it does crash,
right? Do I
yeah.
know what causes it? It's like that thing where
That's how I feel too.
you start a render and then you stop it right away while it's calculating. You know that's gonna crash it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
There are just
I think
certain
you
things.
learn how to tread lightly, and you learn the quirks, and you like
Yeah.
you're like, oh,
Don't
I
undo.
better,
Don't hit undo with nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, like that stuff. Like you
I'm
figure
sort
it
of
out.
kidding. Like it works, but sometimes you get crashes when you do
Yeah.
that a bunch.
Yeah. So for me, like, I don't do like hardcore. I'm not in hardcore production anymore. So
Right.
I can tell you this though. If I was still doing shop-based hardcore like production, there's no way in fucking hell I would allow Octane to be used on the pipeline in production for concept work and boards all day for sure, but not if I was actually like in charge of delivering shots.
See, Jules is in the chat. He's telling you to hit him up after the
He's
show. Sort it
listening.
out, yo. See,
I tried, Jules. I tried, man.
he'll get it set for you. He'll figure it out. Y'all can chat at
I mean, if Jules
WC40.
can solve that, that would actually make future material collections so much easier for us. That would be great.
Yeah. As somebody who spends way too much time in Slack, I see a lot of like just little, hey, I did this thing and like, oh, Octane user, you forgot. Here's the gotcha.
But see, I'm
they all have.
yeah. I'm used to. I don't know. I'm used to the little quirks, but I feel like they have gotten better in 2019. Like it's been a lot more stable for me, and I do like that. That Otoy pretty much listens, as you can see here in the chat,
Yep.
to what people are asking for. Now, Raphael, what do you experience in this? You're still like me, kind of hardcore Octane, so.
Yeah, pretty much. So for me, I have to say it's also gotten a bit more unstable. Maybe a bit is not a bit, but very unstable.
breaking up.
But can you still hear me? I see I'm
Yeah.
frozen. Okay.
Yeah, you're freezing a
Oh,
little
you're
bit, but we
good.
can hear
I
you.
think you're good
Yeah.
now.
Okay. Yeah. So the internet connection is should be, but it's to the US, so I don't know. If
I
it's
think you're
lost
better
now.
now. You're good now. See, as soon as, yeah.
Yeah, it's like also also a bit hard to follow you sometimes because you're breaking up on me also.
Oh, that's
but,
all right.
yeah.
Just do
Oh,
your
that
best.
sucks.
So
That's all right.
I'll try. I'll try. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, Octane, of course, I use it because I like the look of it and I like the way it works. So I have been using it for such a long time. I guess there's this thing where you try to work around stuff where you know that's not possible or that's crashing or something like that, and then it becomes sort of your muscle memory, and you don't even notice anymore that you're working around it.
Right.
And for other users, they run straight into it because they don't know that that's a limitation or that's a crash or something like that. So,
Right.
yeah, I think I use other renderers too, of course, but if you have production on those other renders, it's a totally different thing. And therefore, your like chat is more open to those things where it doesn't get to your muscle memory to work around.
Right.
So yeah, what was the question again?
I mean, that was pretty much it. I was just curious about that because you still use it all the time like I do, you know. And sometimes it's not even a big deal. It's like, okay, if you're going to jack up displacement to like 8K or something like that, be prepared. Something might happen. Just hit save first. I'm not saying that happens all the
Right.
time, but there's things like that even in Cinema 4D where that happens, you know, like where you put the decimal place and a decimal point in the wrong place, and all of a sudden, you know, it's over.
Right.
You know.
Right. One
What
too
I
many
also
zeros.
noticed is that it runs much smoother on newer graphic cards. So if you like, we had an intern in our office lately, and he's gotten a lot of more freezes and crashes than I was on my 1080 Ti's. And I have in my office, I have an external GPU also that's RTX 2080 Ti, and I think it's running even better there. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember too is just that like GPU rendering as a whole is really buggy still.
Yeah. I've had a lot of crashes in Redshift as well.
Yeah,
Like
me
the
too.
two times I did projects on it.
Dude.
Yeah.
And just talk to Ty at PixelPlow, and he will tell you that GPU rendering is not great. Like, it crashes a lot for everybody. So I don't think I don't want to single out just a toy.
It's worth the suffering though.
Yeah.
As we all know.
True.
Yeah, I mean, you have if you go into it like knowing that, then you're okay with it, and then you just sort of like, well, it's new, and like I guess I'll just deal with it. Then yeah.
I mean, it's so much less suffering than something like physical, where you're just waiting forever, you know, to see the slightest bit of your scene. It's just night and day. So even if it crashes more, that's not slowing me down in my overall workflow nearly as much. You know, I can actually light with GPU rendering now versus with physical. You know, that just didn't feel possible.
Oh yeah,
I agree with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the raw speed of being able to iterate is so powerful. I mean, even, you know, when I used Octane for the first time in, you know, 2014, 2015 on just a measly, you know, $200 graphics card, you know, being like someone who played games for the most part, it was like a total life changer. But just like
Yeah.
kind of getting more experience with different engines and just finding what you like. And for whatever reason, we all are going to have our own computer with its own driver. Who knows what build of Windows it's on? It's all this just mystical combination of like whatever's going to work best for you. Like, you know, all three of my machines right now have an uptime of 22 days. That was the last time that there was a major Windows update, and I like, so that just goes to say that like Redshift crashes so infrequently for me that like, you know, it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna keep rolling with this. This is the tool that works for me.
Nice.
It gets me the look that I like, so you know, why rock the boat?
Yeah.
I think we should all just like group thank the invention of the IPR window,
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's the common thread like through all of them is like before, you know, hit render wait, and
Yeah.
now we are so lucky that on, you know, in a short span of time we're able to actually in real time, well, semi real time, like actually adjust our stuff and see it happen. And that's goes for CPU and GPU with the Threadripper chips getting up there. It's like it's a great time to be doing this stuff. It's really fun.
Totally.
I think a lot of the people that are doing dailies, I mean, do you think that the dailies would even be where they are if GPU didn't take off like that to this
Absolutely not.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
level? I mean,
Yeah, no.
people see it, of course, and they say, hey, what render engine is that? You know, the the question that everybody always asks. Because if they get that
Well, I
render
think
engine,
if-
they'll be that good.
They'll be that good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think imagine like how fewer daily renders there would be if the renders took 30 minutes a frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
You know,
Yeah.
like the way that they did, you know, just God, even like 6-7 years ago,
Yeah.
not even that long.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot here to like do interactive stuff with.
What's that? You broke up a little
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm just speaking about the live viewer. That's also like you said, it's very important for the interactivity to get to the point fast and do your daily.
Hell yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it were a 30-minute render, that's not a big deal for a daily render, but it's that feedback, that instantaneous feedback with the live viewer that's really what speeds you up and allows you to craft a still in that short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, without that, I mean, it was tough, man. Like, just like waiting. Like, thank God for that V-Ray follow your mouse. Like the buckets would follow your mouse, because I would just sit there and be like, just like over the same.
Yeah. I want to see this part. I want to see this
Go
part.
faster. It's almost like scratch off tickets.
Right.
Mhm.
I was always looking over to Max and trying to get this implemented into Cinema 4D. It's so annoying that it wasn't there.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, because V-Ray stayed on core build like 1.9 for how many years? Like that's the biggest shame because it had a
10 or
really
something.
it had a
Yeah.
really solid user base in like 2012, 2013, and then the GPU stuff came on board, and it's almost like V-Ray was frozen in time for half
Yeah,
a
it
decade.
really.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that they had the V-Ray RT kind of operating as the same time as like regular V-Ray, and I don't think that they. I don't know what happened there, but I was always hoping that they would merge a lot sooner than they. Well, I don't know if they ever did. Actually, it's been a while since I've looked. So if
Oh.
you know, I'm sure you
Chaos
blast me in the
and-
comments. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the VRRT engine was like their real-time engine. It was the
Oh.
GPU arm of V-Ray. So like that's where they were saying, like, yeah, use V-Ray RT to do like all your real-time like interactivity stuff. But a lot of the features never made it over to V-Ray RT, so people stopped using it, and it was just kind of a mess, really.
And the version that you had on Cinema was actually pretty delayed as well if you wanted to get any new features on there. It was like this whole separate website, remember?
Well, yeah, because
Yeah, I don't
from
know.
what I understand, it was a third-party dev
Yeah.
who I don't know the terms of the agreement, but this one person just ported the builds over
Right.
or some
Yeah.
whatever, and
Well, we
like-
have to give it though because it was one of the first external render engines that was worthwhile in Cinema 4D, and I
Yeah.
started to use it quite a bit. So that was the render engine I've used before I turned to Octane.
And it's amazing how fast
So-
it turns around in Octane now. Ahmed does, the C4D build like the next day or something like
Yeah.
that. It's pretty
I had
nuts.
some problems. Like I hit him up, he does a custom build for me sometimes.
Yeah, he's
That's
done that for
amazing.
me. And
Yeah.
and then I was like, he sent me a PC version. I was like, oh man, I'm on a Mac. And he's like, oh, here's a Mac version too.
Okay.
What you
That's
doing
amazing.
there? A little more. Oh man, maybe I should go get my scotch. Who knows what'll happen? Oh man.
Also, just props to Jules as well for being in the chat and being willing to answer anybody's
Yes.
question on the Slack. Like, that's crazy customer service. Like, what other CEO do you see like just running around answering people's questions like that?
Yeah.
Oh,
And,
yeah, absolutely. I've not been quiet about my experience with Octane in the past or on Slack or whatever, and an infinite amount of credit to Jules for just his presence online in the Facebook group and on Slack, and
Yeah.
I mean, I wish there was a Redshift equivalent,
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
or the plugin dev, doing custom builds for I don't want to say marquee users, but there's obviously there's merit behind having a trusted number of people that like you can get really solid feedback from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important point. And yeah, Jules is always there, and I think that's great. And the only other sort of thing that I can compare that to is the dev who develops the plugin for Arnold, Peter Horvath. He's so good. Like, he is so freaking good. And I've turned over like suggestions, and he'll have it in a build in like 2 days. It's crazy. And so I don't think you can. I think anytime you see a company that cares that much, whether it's Jules hanging out in the chat or Peter turning around a build overnight with a wacky idea that I had, that stuff matters. Like, I don't know if companies realize that, but like, that stuff matters. Like, when you listen to your customers and you really care about their workflow and you try to make your tool as frictionless as possible, and you care about UX and you care about what they're doing and making their lives easier. I mean, that's what I try to do at GSG. I try to just erase as much friction as I can from the production process so that you guys can create as much great shit as you can. And like, whenever I see another dev or another company share that philosophy, I'm always like, yes, that's great.
Yeah. So these people that are just getting into render engines and maybe want to choose one for one reason or another, I think, again, a lot of times it's because they see these, like we said, the daily renders. Oh, what render engine is that? Because, I want mine to look that way. What about...
It's the same for filmmaking and cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's the exact same thing. I think that it's you don't want to discourage them. First of all, if somebody's asking a question, you don't want to discourage and say, oh, well, the setup you have sucks. You want to try and give them advice on what will actually work for them. And so one of the biggest things is always CPU or GPU. And once people realize, oh, they'll probably have to go with CPU because they don't have a bunch of like super expensive graphics cards, because they're just starting out, then they have a hard time rendering. And I think it's so easy to be a freelancer and just have some stacks of video cards, like you do, David. You've got like a million of them stacked up in there. And people who can't afford that often have this kind of issue that they come across is like they don't have money because they don't have the gear, and they need the gear to make the money, chicken and the egg.
Right.
And so people are always asking, how can you afford these cards? And, so the question then becomes price, because for a long time, we didn't have these crazy CPUs like we have now. And even now they're kind of expensive. If you had no direction whatsoever, like if it did not matter what engine you were using, would you choose one type over the other, just because of the way that it scales? So let's say, like, if you want to double your render speed on Corona, you're going to have to buy a whole nother computer, right? Or use a render farm, Yeah,
it's almost like Corona is better for stills and ArcViz artists and that kind of stuff. That's where you could make more money. But when you get into animation, it's like one of the big three: Redshift, Octane, Arnold, is what I am seeing. And yeah, CPU rendering is more expensive, and I think that's one reason, Arnold has shifted to GPU rendering as well. So now all the big three render engines are supporting GPU, which does scale a lot better.
Do you think it's more of like a freelance studio thing, or?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, what is I think it's easy to sort of like think about the industry specifically from the perspective that we all, like, if you're
right, I'm looking at it from my lens, which is a freelance lens, whereas big studios, they want the stability of that CPU farm, or
but not even big studios though. That's what I'm saying. Like, so we at Grayscale Gorilla, we see all sort of like levels, right? From the person working on their own, freelancing from home, to the giant studio and everything in between, right? And I think that it's easy to sort of like think about what's right when you're thinking about your perspective, but you have to sort of put yourself into other people's positions. Like, oh, I'm responsible for churning out 50 different iterations on this like basketball graphic for a real time, for a sports show, or I work at the internal department at Dropbox doing motion design, or I work
Totally.
I do concert visuals at a giant company that travels all around the world. It's like so many perspectives.
Totally.
So it's hard to like. So I want to challenge everybody on this panel to sort of like think about it just one step outside of your sort of domain,
Right.
and like think about those other perspectives, because I really think that that's something that I'm guilty of this too. I tend to think about everything as like, well, this is how I do it.
Right.
So,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Your
Yeah.
version of it's not production ready for lots of people, it's totally production ready. Like all the concert
Right.
visual jobs I'm doing, like 4K, 5K stuff, Octane's completely production ready. I'm a one-man band on it, or maybe there's a small team, or like, yeah, when I hear it's not production ready, that's like very from the lens of a studio. It's not production ready for a studio. It's production ready for lots of freelancers, lots of small teams, yeah.
But I'll challenge you, like just the way that you say Arnold is too slow, it's not too slow if you have a farm.
Right.
Right.
Right?
That's true.
So
But
like there's a flip
what
side to that.
freelancer or small like team could afford a farm of CPUs?
I mean,
I know Trevor Kerr's kind of done it before, and stacked up on like all these small $1,000
Pixel
CPUs.
Cloud makes it a lot more affordable for
That's
sure.
true,
True.
right? You could
True.
just use that as your main workflow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when I left the studio and was doing side jobs early on. That's what I was doing. Like I was
Right.
literally I wasn't rendering anything local. If I was rendering local in my house, I thought like I'm doing it wrong.
To
Like,
me, that
I'm
feels
just-
like such an extra hassle of a step to have to go to a render farm every time you're doing something. I mean, I know you're doing the internal revisions, like you're seeing the IPR and whatnot, but then to have to go to that render farm every single time to me feels like a hassle, and it is more expensive. I know that can be like a line
Well,
item
for
in your
me,
budget.
I
Like you
didn't
can.
have multiple machines, right?
Oh, so that
So
would
if
be
I
much
was
more expensive to buy a bunch of machines, is what you're saying.
Well, not only that, but like if let's say that I was going to render local, right? That would mean that I would have to stop designing the next shot or the next thing,
Right.
Yeah.
and
That
wait
makes
for
sense.
that to render,
Right.
and then be like, do.
And that's the
like
exact
I
reason
want
why I've got 4 computers.
So
Right.
you do have a render farm. I would argue
Yeah.
that you do have a render.
Okay, fair enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. I just have my own
Your own.
local render.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The difference is you got to spend
obviously,
money.
like, I
Right.
think if I hadn't taken let's say I went freelance after I left DK and like didn't start at GSG, I would have done as many jobs in that workflow as I could until I hit a ceiling that like I needed to turn around something so fast that I couldn't do it that way. Then I would do exactly what you did, and I would start purchasing a few machines here and there and start building up my own farm.
Right.
So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did. In 2015, I started with a single GTX 970, and then I bought a 980 Ti, the first freelance job I did. So effectively, I didn't turn a profit on that job. Bought 2 graphics cards. The next job, I bought another one. Within 6 months of being freelance in 2017, I had 12 GPUs.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, you put a quarter of the budget that you're into, or profit each job into building up until you get to a point where either your IT infrastructure can't support more machines, which is kind of like the ceiling that I'm at personally because I am my own IT.
Right.
And
That's a whole other bag too. Like
Yeah.
that scares the shit
Yeah.
out of me. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
but you just manage your growth, and it's that question that Dave, you kind of mentioned from the beginning is like the chicken and the egg. Well, you do what you can with what you've got,
Yep.
and you build your way up over time. It's
Gradually
not-
reinvest in yourself.
Right, and because that money that you spend is going to go so far into allowing you to iterate more renders overnight, which is going to give you and your clientele a better level of polish, which will result in more presentable work, which will attract more clients with more budgets, and it's just a snowball. None of
Yeah.
us started out with the joke of the $1 million loan or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like we all have built up whatever we have kind of as our own as professionals here.
Right.
So I've done that at studios too. Like I made that exact same argument to management. Every job we need to put money aside and purchase more machines for the farm. Why? Well, because the more machines we have, the more jobs we can do, the more things we can turn around overnight. And once we built it and they saw it churn, and we get a note at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and have a new version done sometimes before we left that night, the lights would go off and they'd be
Right.
like,
They're like, oh,
oh,
this equals
shit.
money.
Yeah, like, right.
Yeah.
And so, and that was all CPU, obviously. But yeah, you just got to make that small investment. And as a freelancer that is looking to sort of like invest that money in yourself, I think that's a no-brainer. I always tell people, buy the most expensive machine you can afford. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
maybe a little bit beyond that even.
You'll work faster, and then you can also charge more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what is your sanity worth? What is your time worth? What is your family time worth? Because all of that money is going to go into preserving those things.
And
That's true.
also,
I mean, sometimes all the cylinders are firing, and I'm like, well, time to take a nap, time to go play video games, time to go hang out with the family and watch a movie.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to be rendering this job for the
So you
next
have cards
3 days,
left
so that's
to
3 days
play
off.
Video games.
yeah, exactly. GTA.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the problem
Yeah.
is I want to play GTA, but I want to use the cards that my computer's using to render.
Right, that's why you have to have consoles. Yeah,
That's a
it's
slippery
different.
slope.
Yeah.
The
I
dilemma.
have the 2080 Ti, man. It gets so many frames per second in Battlefront.
Yeah. Well,
Christmas break, I couldn't
Sorry,
control
internet
myself.
Nice.
yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I have done a render on only one card before, so I could use the other card to play video games.
That's amazing.
You know, but
Priorities.
yeah. So another question I got here is about. Oh, I think Chad, you froze.
Yeah, Chad's frozen.
Yeah, it did the freezy thing.
He's coming back.
Yeah, there he is.
Hey, you're back.
So, all right. I want to talk about textures a little bit because somebody in the chat was talking about Unreal and Unity. Like, we're not. I don't think any of us are really that into Unity, Unreal. I know. I mean, I've dabbled with it, but I don't really know about it. You know. But with video games, speaking of which, and textures for different render engines, kind of starting to come together. I don't know. Where do you think textures are going? Because you've got Substance Designer, you've got these materials that are starting to basically be the same in everything now. Do you think people are going to move to doing texturing fully somewhere else at one point and rendering somewhere else, or where do you think that's going? Especially like as video games become more real time, like people using Unreal for doing digital sets and things like that. Do you think it's all going to unify?
I think Unreal is great, and I think it's what they're doing is really insanely cool. But I still think it's a little ways away from us being able to like, oh, I'm going to jump in there and finish my
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't think it's quite there yet. I think it's getting there, and I think they've got the resources to definitely push it to that place. But it's an interesting thought because you've got a lot of fragmentation happening right now in the market already. Even just in our industry, there's a lot of fragmentation. So the idea of it's going to be weird. It's going to be hard to say like, well, you're going to have to animate in here, and then you're going to have to bring it over into Unreal, and then make sure, oh, if you want to change the animation, you got to go back over here, and then
Right.
back in here. And it's just not until they work out the user experience and really make it easy. I don't think it's going to be something that the everyday artist is probably going to want to jump into.
For sure.
And
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead, David.
I was just gonna say, I feel like you need to know like some coding skills, and there's a lot more that comes with the territory. As far as I mean, that's just what I've heard. I haven't actually delved into it. I tried out like Unreal 3 very briefly because I was taking an FX PhD course, but yeah, I think it's gotten a lot more user friendly for sure, but it still seems like intimidating to me.
I think what's interesting is because game engines have to do so many like what we would call cheats or hacks.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a lot of things like light map baking and like GI caching that stuff that like, I mean, I've only been in the industry really for like 6 years, so I'm probably at the tail end of people who would have used things like Mental Ray. And, like, has anyone who's only used Octane before, like, just a run of the mills, Cinema 4D plus Octane user, have they ever cached an Irradiance prepass?
No.
No. And so what's interesting is like there's almost this like bell curve in that like people who rendered, a decade ago are going to have a leg up on people who are switching into the game engine stuff now because there's a lot of familiar, terminology and familiar processes. Like Unreal is great once you've spent 12 hours baking out the light map and then it's
Exactly.
real time.
Exactly. And that's what people don't talk about, right? They don't talk about that part.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of merging that's kind of happening though because everybody in the chat's talking about, RT. Everybody's going to do this whole RT switch where you do real time, like Redshift, for example. So you can kind of see your scene.
Brigade,
I mean, or
Octane.
Brigade, and so you're almost doing a video game thing to begin with. That might kind of help. I don't know if there's going to be any extra options that'll come along with that, where it will bring in any of that video game technology. But
So I'm kind of curious how that plays out too, because I feel like it follows a little bit of Moore's law, where when you make something real time, people are immediately going to want to like push it just past that.
Right.
And they're going to be like, oh shit, it doesn't do it or
Right.
whatever. But I think if you are able to work within the limits of whatever RT has, then I'm sure you could do some really great stuff. And I think that there'll be plenty of people out there that's good enough for everything they do.
do you think there's a point where the curve will actually like, I don't know, where the curves will come together? I mean, maybe in like 100 years to where there is no difference anymore. It's just
Well before.
If we're all
100
still
years.
here.
yeah.
I feel like there's some statistic that says in like 20 or 30 years, computers will be as smart as a rat brain, and then maybe like another 20 years after that, they'll be as smart as a human brain. So I'm pretty sure somewhere in that time, we're going to be able to do real-time rendering.
Yeah, but my human brain can't render, so I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's true.
True.
I can't even math.
Yeah,
Well, your eyes are basically rendering in real time.
that's
Like,
true.
That's true.
That's like
Oh,
terabytes
snap.
worth. That's terabytes worth of data per
Well,
second.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in a way you're right.
Yeah, well, maybe that's
Maybe
the.
this is all just a fucking render.
I know. That's what I was gonna say.
It's all a simulation.
Yeah.
We're all
I would more
we're all
call it like heavy image processing or something, like the eyes. It's not like ray tracing or something.
We need Elon Musk to come on and talk to us about that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
we're all just being rendered in one of his GPU clusters somewhere.
Yeah.
It's true.
None of this is real.
Yeah. He just came inside to say hi.
We're just talking about the rendering inside the rendering. It's like that
Yeah.
Rick and Morty episode with the worlds inside the world.
He's like, "Yo, dog, I heard you like rendering." So,
God.
I want to talk about Arnold a little bit too, because there's kind of this with GPU on Arnold now. There's kind of this this kind of look everyone's giving it, like the meme, the guy turning his head looking at the woman or whatever. It's
Oh, yeah,
like,
they're all checking it out.
yeah, checking it out. Everybody, because there was kind of that whole like Octane boom, and then the Redshift happened, and you had people moving over, and some people going back and forth, and people switching for good. But I think this time there were a lot of people waiting for that Arnold GPU, and they're like, should I do it? Should I wait? Should I go try some CPU stuff as opposed to GPU? And of course, Chad, I think you're the one who has the most knowledge on this at this point.
It's my favorite.
Yeah?
We know.
And why is it your favorite?
favorite. Mainly, I think because of the look it gives, and I would say right next to that is the features. Like those two things. Wait, I'll add a third one. The versatility. So, like, I would say that image quality, features, versatility, like those three things. That's what I
mean, it's
But,
been
like,
tested time and time again with like blockbuster movies. It's
Yeah,
a
so
pretty
it's-
badass renderer. Yeah.
And I also really believe in like I believe in investing in software. Not actually, no, I don't believe investing in software. I believe in investing in people. And I think the team that develops Arnold, whether it's the plugin or the main development team, they're so good. Like they're so smart that that's what I know they're always going to come up with the best feature. They're going to support the latest whatever ACES, OpenColor IO, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
They're on top of it. And the features, man, I honestly like. I really like well-designed software. I'm a designer. I appreciate good design. And when I use Arnold, I'm always delighted. And I get it's that delight factor that I don't really get as much in other renderers.
Mm-hmm.
So what about
It's fun to use.
Oh,
It's fucking fun
That's
to
the delight I get in Octane.
use. Yeah. And that's okay. Like
And
you can
a lot
find
of it
delight
does have
in
to
that,
do, I
right?
think, with
You know?
a lot of it has to do, I think, with just how familiar you are with the software. Like it just the number of years I've been using it, it just makes it so easy to zip around, and it feels like the software gets out of my way. And that's what I want with all of the software that I use, you know, to be at
Right.
that level of comfort where I can just be creative and not worry about the buttons and stuff. And I don't even think about the fact that, oh, I just did a scatter with this, you know, noise in there and all these other things, you know. So yeah, each render engine can be that for everyone, I feel.
And I love that. And so for me, I get that feeling when I want to design a material. I can design any material that I can think of, anything in that program.
Totally.
And so because they've got every math node, every just everything is there. It's an open book, and I think that's what I love about it. And I can't get that in the other render engines the same way. Some of them get close, and they do some things that are sort of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like if I have an idea in my head and I want to get it out, like, oh, I have this idea for material, I can get that done in Arnold without like wanting to pull my hair out. Whatever. I
Right.
don't really have a lot of hair left, so
Your beard
You know-
hair
you know
without
what I'm
pulling
saying.
your beard hair.
yes, thank you.
there's
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
because I use Arnold sparingly. One of the studios that I freelance at in the building that I work in, they're all Mac, so they're all Arnold still. And as I'm a pretty proficient, look dev artist, mostly on GPU. The history in Octane, and now currently using Redshift. And what is beautiful about C4D2A, the Arnold C4D plugin, is so much translates just from kind of a Cinema 4D user. Like I do a lot of Espresso stuff. Chris Schmidt's Espresso stuff was really what hooked me in the beginning, and so I'm always going in there and making user data and like little tidbits here and there to save myself time. And love it or hate it, the fact that Redshift and Arnold are built on the Espresso node graph and that they speak one to one. I can drag in a rigged character who has like finger controls, and I can drag that finger control in, and then like if I want to curl the finger and turn it red once it's curled.
Nice.
Just some
That's
any
cool.
dumb thing that an art
Yeah.
director is going to ask me for. Like, oh, when the character goes to reach in, pick up the pencil, we want to like have this effect sprawl over the character's arm. And it's like, cool, there's replacements for that, like vertex maps and fields and whatever. But then like, oh, we didn't cache this thing, or like, oh, now the farm can't read this one file. And Espresso is just gonna like read that because like
Yeah.
I'm just putting a null and I'm outputting like a scene radius units in like centimeters or something. Like it's just an offline kind of piece of data that every version of Cinema that this thing is gonna render on, it's just gonna read.
And it stays
that's what's
procedural that way too.
Exactly, and that flexibility with the Espresso interface is personally why I have stuck with R20 and not have jumped to R21, because like the whole Redshift new Max on Node
Well,
setup
can't you still
thing.
choose between the two?
Yeah, you can still use it.
You can, but like if I'm not gonna take the time to jump to 21 and then not use like the defining
Right, the big
feature.
feature. I hear you.
Right.
But
And
that-
But that darker color scheme, though.
But it
It's so
has,
good.
Mhm.
but there's color contrast issues when it comes to modeling. If you're looking at a modeling in smooth
Yeah,
shading mode,
that's
and
true.
then the blue line of the polygons, depending on if you're looking at it up or down, you can't see it.
Hmm.
Hopefully they'll fix that.
But yeah, I do think that Redshift and Arnold handle data better for sure. But the reasons you just listed are exactly why I fear that node graph, because I
Yeah.
don't use Espresso like ever. So
Well,
for me, the little nodes in Octane are doing the trick. Um, I mean, C4D's node interface is also really great. If there's like a full implementation of that, then I would be down for that too.
yeah, I think Billy makes a really great point though. Like I love that you may not ever touch that stuff because it might be over your head or
Hmm.
whatever, but the fact that it's there is really
Yeah,
awesome. Like,
it's this deep like extra power that you can draw on when you
yeah,
Mhm.
learn it.
when I did a Spider-Verse tutorial where I like made a halftone material using nothing but like standard Arnold tools, and the fact that I can drive the position of a ramp knot, like a single knot in a ramp
Mm.
with a value, and then have that
Mm.
duplicated hundreds of times via a UV transform node, and have it still. I know this is kind of
UV
a weird,
transforms Octane. You're getting your terminology crazy.
and just like be no, it's both,
Oh, it is really?
and
Okay.
yeah, and so then being able to like control using light coming off of a Lambertian shading model to drive the value of that knot and have it repeat over a texture and still I'm not making any sense now, but
No, it's
you get
okay.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is the render nerd out. Like,
Yeah,
let's
totally.
get geeky.
Okay,
Like,
so
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how far I could
No,
push it,
dude, all the
All
way.
the way.
but so I'll push it to 11. But yeah, just that alone is like holy shit. Like this is like a completely limitless sandbox,
Hmm.
and that just excites me so much.
So it's
And
almost more Houdini-like in that way,
it
versus
very
like
much is.
for me, Cinema 4D and Octane are, in my opinion, more similar because of the ease of use. And I mean, they're both deep, but they're not so deep that you can. I mean, unless you're getting into Espresso, that's true. But it's not like Houdini or Nuke or these other programs where every single node, nothing's
Right.
taken for granted, and you can build, games in there, or build whatever, anything you want. Like the possibilities are literally endless. But for me, that's almost intimidating. I'd rather have more of those, you know, shortcuts or the, what are they
Yeah,
called? Shelf
yeah.
tools.
But I think the thing about you don't have like what I like about it is that you don't have to go there. Like
Right.
it has
there
a
if you need
Uber
it.
it has an Uber shader
Hmm.
that you're like, oh, I just want some subsurface. Then grab an Uber shader, turn up the subsurface. How many units do you want the light to penetrate? Oh, 10 sounds pretty good. Boom, done.
Right.
Like to do that in any other renderer is a pain in the ass. I'm sorry,
That's
but
definitely true.
so like that is another reason that I think studios like Billy mentioned are totally fine using Arnold because it makes sense, but then if you cross the threshold of wanting to go deep, you can go deep.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I
You
do
throw
like
your
being able
hacker
to
man at it.
do the Octane materials and just throw like a basic material on without having to do any nodes whatsoever. Raphael, how about you, Raphael? You ever use nodes? You don't use nodes, do you?
Never.
Nah,
He doesn't
I
don't use
obsessively
nodes,
clean
you have
up
to
his
like
nodes.
you have to just like get out of this call right now.
Yeah.
He writes all his own
yeah,
OSL.
sorry, the internet is very shitty here right now, so I
That's
hear
okay.
half of the things you're saying, so
Oh.
that's why I'm so silent.
Oh
that's
man,
okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
sucks.
we know that your
You
node
don't
trees
have
are
to
good
be
though.
sorry. It's
Yeah, we know you straighten out every single node so that they're perfectly
Yeah.
in line with the next one.
Yes.
Oh my God, I do that every day. That's most of
See,
my day.
and that gets to a feature that I wish Octane would just implement, which is node snapping.
Snap.
Oh
Snapping?
yeah, definitely.
I
Yeah.
will say like Billy's organizational skills in the node graph are unparalleled.
Thank you. I
Nice.
honestly spend more time laying out node networks than developing them.
What are you gonna do when like they have an auto
Right, when they
arrange
automat-
and snapping?
they just-
Like what are you
Yeah.
gonna do?
Joke's
Yeah.
on you. That already exists. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but his name on Twitter is ARTARTUR, I think.
Oh
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah.
His icon's like a little
Yeah,
panda
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Art.
But Yeah,
That is cool.
he made a whole like preset thing of Python scripts, which it's just a little button like with like 8 buttons or whatever, and it's kind of like an Illustrator. You have like the align. You can do like left justify, you can right justify, you can top center, whatever, and like yeah, so that's replaced a lot of my life.
We're actually using that. I completely forgot that exists, but we're using it on future stuff.
Mhm.
It's great.
So what about if somebody is in a GPU engine right now and they want to try Arnold just because of GPU? Is that a good reason to try Arnold?
Arnold GPU is still super early. It's definitely so much better than it was when we talked about it when I was in Dallas last, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually been using it more than I've been using the CPU version as of late because of they just released. So they have a partnership with NVIDIA, like a pretty, I guess, deep partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And NVIDIA released a new studio driver that increased the performance of Arnold GPU like by a lot. It was actually kind of crazy, like how much this driver version made a difference in that renderer. It is extremely hardware dependent, and I tell people this all the time. Like, you have to have an RTX card. Like they say, like, well, see, they on the website they say like you could have, a 1070 or whatever. No,
Oh,
don't
wow.
even bother. Don't
Okay.
bother. Get it. You got to rock the 2080 Ti's at least,
So
and if you have more than, what's that?
I was gonna say, so I've got one system that can run Arnold properly. That's good to know.
Yeah, and so the other thing to remember too is that it can really take advantage of NVLink. So I have an NVLink on my system,
Mm-hmm.
so it can share memory and all that sort of thing. And then ultimately it's good, but if speed is like your main qualifier, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna see if this is as fast as Octane or even Redshift, then you're gonna be fucking disappointed.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
it's not, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not. And like that's not why you would use it. You wouldn't use it purely for the speed. You're using it for the features, using it for the plugin, using it for the versatility of being able to bounce between CPU, GPU, you're using it for tune shading. Like there's other reasons you'd be using it.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about too was aces, because I keep hearing about this, and explain to me like I'm five, because I want to
explain
know.
Aces.
Yeah.
Does it give you more dynamic range or just like more pretty
By the
colors?
end of this, I want you all. Well, no, I take that back. You can't all, but at least you should all be complaining to your respective renderers to
Right.
support Open Color IO fully. Octane. Here's the good news: doesn't really matter for you, because Octane is a spectral renderer. You're already getting sort of the ground truth best image possible. You don't necessarily need aces. But it would be great, and I'm sure that Jules is on it and is going to support it. It might already be in the works. I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
it's in
Tokyo
2020,
Megaplex.
I think.
What'd you say?
It's in the version 2020.
Oh, that's
I
cool.
think.
Okay, 2020. Sweet.
I figured they would be all over it because it's sort of like something that I think that they would be interested in. Yeah, so I'd recommend go watching the video that we just posted. I think that probably does the best job of explaining it. And
Tokyo
if you're
Megaplex
like,
said one does not simply understand aces.
no, but you can. It's really not that big of a deal. So all right, I'm going to do my best to break it down. So ACES is basically a system for managing color, right? It was actually created so that multiple different companies
Yeah.
shooting in different formats and creating in different things could all work in one space, right? And then output it to anything.
It's
They
like
could
a
work in
limbic.
one space. Sort of, but then you imagine a limbic, but you were going to output to a bunch of different formats, and you needed like a consistent place to do it, right? That's what ACES is. ACES is actually just nothing more than input device transforms and output device transforms. And I know that sounds like gibberish, but think about it.
Okay, it's like a universal converter.
Kind of like that, right? Then there's another component to it, that I'll get to. So imagine like you shot something in log, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to add a 3D element to this log footage.
Yeah.
So if you're working in Arnold with OpenColor.io and ACES, you could actually load that footage, that log footage, without having to pre-convert it to anything.
Right.
Load it into Cinema and say, oh, what's my input device transform? Well, this was shot in log. Okay, cool. Now I've set my input device transform. It was set to log. Now it's in ACES CG. Now there's ACES CG and just regular ACES, but I'm going to stick to ACES CG because that's just going to be easier.
Right.
So now when I'm looking at it in my IPR, I've got my background plate loaded and my IPR output device transform, because that's what this is. This is an output. It's showing me an image. I'm going to choose my output device transform of my monitor or whatever it is I'm going out to. In our case, it's going to be sRGB most of the time, maybe Rec 709. So set that output device transform to Rec 709, and instantly your log footage that you shot looks correct. It looks like it
Nice.
has like sRGB.
So it's like a viewing LUT, basically.
And it's kind of like that. So now you're marrying your CG to that footage in ACES, and it looks correct, right? So now you're able to render that out as an EXR in ACES. Now the comper can bring that in and be like, oh, what did this 3D render come in at? Oh, it came in ACES CG. Cool. Input it as ACES CG. What did that footage come in at that we shot? Oh, log? Okay, cool. Log. Bring that into ACES regular. Now everything comes into ACES. The colorist or compositor is able to in like a unified place. And then when it goes out, they're like, hey, what are we delivering this in? Oh, it's going out to the internet. Okay, cool. Let me choose a sRGB output transform. Oh, this is going out to film. All right, let me choose a D65 or whatever it is. And like that's the system of ACES, right?
So it takes the guesswork out of the process, basically. Yeah.
That's not really the juicy part for us. The juicy part for us is ACES CG, the color space. So ACES CG, the color space, is a wide gamut color space. So everything that we're doing now is in sRGB. So we're sort of we're making creative decisions. We're designers, we're artists. We're making creative decisions in an sRGB gamut, which is limited. Right?
For sure, yeah.
You're not making really good color saturation.
Right, but how much can our monitors actually display of that ACES?
Don't even worry about that.
Okay.
Because your output device transform is sRGB, right? It doesn't matter. But I guarantee if you just worked sRGB, now for Octane, it's not as much of an issue because, like I said, it's a spectral renderer. It's seeing light in a different way. But let's use Redshift as an example. If you weren't doing any sort of output LUT, or you're not doing any sort of like color mapping or anything to your image, and you just like cranked the saturation of red on a light, it would start to fringe, it would start to halo and get really fucking ugly, right? So what ACES does is it's just a really fucking good curve. Think about it that way.
Yeah.
So
with like nice highlight roll off and all that.
With a fucking beautiful film roll off. It just looks so good. And it's no effort, right? Like once you've like told all of your textures to come in correctly using the right input device transform, and it maps everything correctly going out through your IPR, it looks gorgeous. You have more light, you can push more light into your scene, therefore getting more indirect light because now you're throwing more energy through your lights, and it doesn't fall apart. It does not break. It looks insanely good.
Would you say it gives you a lot more dynamic range?
No, because linear is linear. Like you're still outputting a linear EXR. Like for the most part, a renderer is sort of color space agnostic. It's going to deliver the data no matter what. It's going to deliver your data the same, right? But the difference that I tell people, it's not about that. It's about you. It's about the creative decisions you make when you're lighting, when you're creating textures, when you're setting a mood, when you're doing your creative work. You're able to make more creative, push it a little bit further, push the exposure up, push the lights up, push the saturation up. And you're seeing something that feels and reacts more like film because of that output device transform.
So how could ACES improve Octane's workflow? You're saying it doesn't really need it, but
it doesn't really. The way that it'll help Octane is purely for, and I could be wrong, guys. Like I'm not a scientist. Like,
right, you're not a color scientist.
Yeah. So like for me, Octane already sort of being a spectral renderer is sort of the ground zero truth. Like it looks like you would want it to look, right? That's why
Is that not
Octane
true with
looks.
Arnold though, too?
No,
Or
it's
no?
not a spectral
Okay,
renderer. It's not a
gotcha.
spectral renderer. So
What's the definition of Arnold's type?
it's just it's a ray tracer. It's
Okay.
not it's not like it's not the same. Like if you ever notice, like Octane sees light in frequencies and sees color in
Yeah,
frequencies.
like Kelvin and
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
that's a spectrum, right?
right.
And I'm not going to pretend to know the
And
definitions
that's
of
why
those.
it kind of sucks to put in an RGB spectrum, supposedly, because
Exactly.
then you're introducing magenta and
Yeah.
purple or these other colors that aren't on the actual spectrum. But then
Yeah.
that's why there's the Gaussian spectrum node,
Right.
which is more accurate.
It's color temperature
and
based,
plays
basically, right?
right, exactly.
The reason Octane looks so good is because it's more of it's a little bit more like Indigo. It's a little bit more of a simulation than it is an approximation.
Mhm.
And what Aces does is it levels that playing field for Arnold and hopefully soon Redshift.
Hmm.
So they will appear more filmic and more like a spectral if using that workflow. But back to your question, the benefits of Aces to Octane is probably purely for workflow. If you're working on an ACES show and you
Right.
need to deliver an ACES CG element, or you're
Mhm.
working with footage that comes in as log or whatever, and the same workflow that I
Yeah,
just described.
because I used to manually have to convert to log and then output like, an image sequence that just had the log baked in like that, and then do the matching in Octane and make everything flattened and weird,
Right.
and then output linear, and then basically put a curve over those two things together in After Effects, and it's a lot more complex. Yeah.
Yep. So that'll help that because ACES is a system for dealing with color as well as it is a color space. So it's those sort of two things that really work together. And yeah, I mean, ever since I started using it, I only want to use that now. It's become like my go-to. It just makes everything without having to like try, without having to put a LUT on
Mhm.
it, without having to do a lot of grading. It just looks good.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's one of the reasons why I gravitated towards Octane, I think, because it just does look really good
Yeah.
right out of the gate. Yeah.
So this is one of those things that I think Arnold and Octane, or sorry, Arnold and Redshift users are going to really love because it's sort of like it makes it feel more like film, and I think that's what's
Mhm.
been missing.
Yeah.
Arnold, I think, it was way closer than Redshift in terms of like out of the box looking like film, way closer.
For sure.
But this even gets it even closer than that.
Nice.
And what
So
about
did that
what?
make sense?
Yeah. Well,
I need a drink. After that.
I'll have to watch. I'll have to
That
watch
was
it a couple
great-
times.
that was actually that was a very clear breakdown.
Yeah, that was good.
and appreciated.
Do you think
Yeah,
that?
check out our blog post. We have a whole blog post on it, and if
Oh,
you're
nice.
a Plus member, you can watch the whole series.
I am a
and,
Plus member.
Are you? Well, there you
Yeah.
go. Hey, if you're not a Plus member, I've got a special offer at the end of the show. So let me.
Oh, snap.
Don't let me forget.
Nice.
What about the compositing in IPR? How far do you think that that's going to go here pretty soon? Do you think it's going to
Yeah, well,
escalate?
ABC is doing a lot of that, where they're bringing in these cards of fighters and just bringing in the animation, and that gets baked in. They're using their renderer as a compositor at this
Right.
point, which I think is really cool, and that's kind of how I work to a large degree as well. When I've done more, VFX type workflows, or at the very least bringing in things bringing in green screen elements to line up the shot and make sure
Yeah.
that everything the perspective is gonna work and whatnot. Not necessarily baking in the compositing elements like ABC's doing, but at least bringing those in with alphas into Octane to see that everything's gonna line up properly.
Because then you can get shadows and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like the Phil Roberts example of here you've got a glass bottle and I bring in an animated texture behind it, and now all the stuff from this animated texture is getting refracted in the glass. There's like a lot of these
Right.
techniques that can make your CG more integrated in compositing by going kind of the reverse direction of what you would normally expect to do.
Yeah, and if you look at what Houdini and Blender do, like they have compositing components in their app,
Yeah.
which is very similar to how XSI was, rest in peace, back in the day. And like that, to me, like that's exciting, man. Imagine if I've always wanted this. Like we sort of take this for granted, but I do a ton. Obviously, I do a ton of compositing and Substance Designer and image manipulation with nodes. And when I'm in Cinema, I'm always like, man, I just want to like blur this node. Like, can I not just like blur this node and like
Right.
throw this into like a levels and like I would love to work in a system where everything was sort of together like that.
Yeah.
Where I could create a material and also take the output of that scene and start to composite it as it's happening.
Totally.
Almost
Like, that
like
would
you've
be
got
sick.
like fusion nodes inside.
Yeah, we don't need
Yeah.
After Effects anymore. We can just build the compositors into,
Yeah.
and it would make for a better experience too.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine if like you set up a scene in Cinema and you're like, okay, here's my output, and then you go into like comp mode or whatever, and you allow one frame to like draw in that output node, and now all of a sudden you start comping. And you're like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's gonna do this.
that'd
and
be
then
really
that.
cool.
Yeah.
And then you're just waiting for it to finish, and then it's like a really long RAM preview, really.
Yeah.
Waiting for that 3D render to finish. Like that to me is exciting. And like
Totally.
if we could get to that place.
Well, maybe.
Kind of reminds me of Hero. Do you guys know that program by the or I guess
Yes.
it's not the Foundry anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Nuke.
The
It's
Nuke
their
people.
overall suite. It's like here's your editor, your
Mhm.
nonlinear editor, but then you can dive into any of these shots. It's kind of like After Effects, how you can send over to Premiere Pro or Premiere Pro to After Effects,
Right.
you know, but that on crack,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Right.
You can do different versions of the shot and all of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Maybe Max on Redshift thing. They'll build in a new compositor for us. Maybe that's the next
Or
step.
with the Red Giant Super Comp, whatever that.
The red,
whatever
the
that
red
thing
giant.
was.
Chat. What was that face? He's not gonna say anything.
Yeah,
He's not gonna say anything. Yeah, no.
Exactly.
No comment.
Yeah.
But I will say, Sean Astrom is in the chat, and I got to give a shout out to him. He's our
That's awesome.
latest new hire at Grayscale Gorilla.
Yeah.
Oh, no
Oh, I
way.
didn't know that.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Congrats.
Yeah. So
Congrats, Sean.
he is our senior 3D artist / material architect working
Oh, that's
with
rad.
me.
Oh, Sean
Representing.
says Foundry is still Foundry, so
Oh,
yeah,
it
I was
is.
thinking of
Okay.
maybe whatever it was before the Foundry. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's dope. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that the talk about compositing and like cheating stuff by bringing cards like back into 3D is really interesting because like a lot of the shorts we do, me and my friends at Boxford is like we're going the opposite direction where we're going back to cartoons and not like this filmic pixel science aces. That's above my head. So the like
It's not though. You can do it.
I know, but like I don't really necessarily need that stuff, and I think that's why I've gravitated to Redshift personally. Is like the ability, at least out of the box, using light includes and excludes, which at my time
Right.
of leaving Octane wasn't a thing in 3.0. Like, the little fisherman short we did, where it was like,
Mhm.
I'm really good with Redshift's environment fog. I just have sort of figured out I've cracked the code and I use it in everything, and it
Yeah.
gives me like a really fun and artistic kind of painterly look. And what we did in the lock, the little fisherman short, was we look dev'd it with GSG Ultimate Skies HDR. Shout out.
Yep, that's a good
and
one.
Oh yeah.
It was
And
it
Sean
was-
Astrom developed that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
he made those. So
Yeah.
it gave us a really cool look, a really just beautiful lighting right out of the box. I didn't even rotate the HDR.
Didn't even rotate.
Can we use that as a quote, dude?
I figured which
We didn't
direction.
even fucking rotate it.
I figured which direction they're all built in one direction, and I figured
true,
that
the
out. And
sun's
I
always
always,
in the same
Oh,
position.
okay.
I
It's
always,
really helpful,
I always,
actually.
I always
Yeah.
build my scenes in that direction. But anyway, long story short, is there was too much realistic looking cloud in the backplate. And so, the artist sitting next to me was like, there's just too much cloud here. Like, what can we do? And I was like, well, I can render you out what the frame looks like with no atmospheric fog, no depth of field, no nothing, no LUT or post effects, it looks like junk. But if I render that out for you, and then he took that into Procreate and redrew and repainted the clouds, and then I used the backplate button in the dome light on Redshift,
Mm-hmm.
brought that back on, and then I turned back on all my post effects. I turned back on the fog and the depth of field, and all of that just blended so
That
beautifully.
that button only works though when your camera's locked, right? Because it's just like it doesn't. It's not the same as like just putting a background object in there or something like that.
Well, well, you're
Or
correct
maybe
in
it
saying
is the same as putting a background object, but it's not the same as like an HDRI that is locked to the scene. You can't really move the camera because then it's
right, yeah. The
yeah,
the back plate, which is different than using just a dome light and seeing whatever you're seeing back there
right.
from HDR. That is a static image, but if you are working with footage or like running footage or whatever, you can just use an image sequence
Mhm.
as that back plate. So
Right,
like if
right,
you're,
right.
in this case, it's a locked camera. Yeah, we're not doing anything where we need parallax or any of that stuff.
Yeah. This was for the train station shot. Is that what you're talking about?
Um, this specific workflow was for the the fisherman
Oh, the
thing. It's like
fisherman thing. Okay,
the,
cool.
the sea monster. Yeah. Um, yeah. And then we're all about just like bringing stuff back in. We're actually releasing another short tomorrow, and that one
Oh,
has like
nice.
little like Photoshoppy like little plants and stuff, kind of just placed real simply in the foreground. I mean, we used a lot of that in the half res stuff as well, where two of the characters were drawn completely in Procreate, and I was bringing those back in as image sequences, and standing those cards next to my 3D character
Mm-hmm.
and getting like the light like bloom from the post effects and like
Yeah.
light wrapping and
Hmm.
shadow casting on the floor and all that. Not to say you can't do those things with Octane because David,
Obviously.
you do the same sorts of things, but like
Right.
just the I guess the mindset of this like fake compositing stuff that you
Totally.
mentioned, like ABC is doing, like that stuff's really fun to kind of bring back into the fold. And I think that's what's so interesting about.
Yeah, then all these cutouts sit properly in that haze and they cast shadows into that volume and it all fits together better without having to bang your head against the wall compositing forever.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what's cool about having like mixed background, artists in your team or whatever. Is like, oh, this compositor person, their brain is going to work this way, and
Right.
this cinematographer type character is going to want to shoot stuff this way, and it's like for me and like my friends, most of them are like illustrators,
Hmm.
and so that's
Mm-hmm.
like a whole
That's a great way you guys can start to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, is what you're saying.
right. And so just like me, I don't really feel like as much of an artist, like an artist's artist, as I feel
Right.
like a technical artist.
Totally.
And so like, my friends will have this like wild artsy idea and they're like, how do I make this work? And I'm like, hmm. And then I figure it out and then we make something that looks really cool. At least in my opinion, it feels really unique and it feels like it's our voice.
Hmm.
Redshift being the tool that we use at the time, can't complain.
So Chad, like what kind of compositing are you really doing? Like is it mostly color corrections or is it like those things that you want to keep flexible? So like these are two different mindsets. I feel like the newer mindset is doing a lot of this compositing in 3D versus the maybe more old school mindset is having ultimate flexibility in post, and what kind of flexibility do you want? Because I think we're beyond the point of like wanting to do like Z depth passes to create shallow depth of field in
Mm.
post or
Right, right.
do motion blur in post. Like those things obviously look better in render. But then, and
Yeah.
this came up a couple of weeks ago with Sakani too, and he said that he just really likes to do a lot of detailed color work and like, for instance, enhance the hero stormtrooper and put lots more contrast on him and like
Yeah.
tweak the beauty pass or the diffuse pass and give that more contrast and really like tweak the heck out of the look.
Yeah, flexibility is key. Like, first of all, I don't rebuild beauties at all. Like,
Hmm.
I just am like that's just overkill for me. Like,
Right.
I don't do that. So I tend to render out per light AOVs or light group
Hmm.
AOVs so that I can play with lighting in comp.
Hmm.
Like, if I change my
That's
mind,
interesting.
like I want like this to be a bit more like contrasty or whatever.
Yeah.
And then that's just a creative thing for me. But like if I'm doing like a product spot, like a product job, I just spit out mats for everything. Like
Well, for product jobs, that definitely makes sense. When you're like really tweaking every little detail on that one hero image,
exactly.
that
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. But like from my workflow where I'm like moving quickly or I know what kind of lighting and look I want, and I get that all in the IPR, that to me is more flexible and powerful because, yeah, that's just.
If you can get what you need out of the IPR and you don't anticipate any notes on those
Right.
elements,
But see, the thing is, those notes
Yeah.
are very rarely like shift this one person's dress to a different hue. The notes are like, okay, move this person, or completely change the depth of field, or let's like, almost always the notes for me would
well,
require
changing
a
the depth
full,
of field would be a shitty note to get.
whatever. What I'm trying to say is like almost every
re-render.
note,
Yeah.
almost every note for me would require a full re-render. So that's why I've not gravitated towards flexibility in comp. And like,
I think if you it really depends on what you're making, right? Like if you're making something that's more, I guess, atmospheric or creative, that there's no like tangible product to change. There's no like the only note they might have is like a creative note. Then do whatever works, obviously.
Yeah.
But like if you're working on advertising, then you're pretty much going to have a product, or you're going to have something that's very sort of like they're looking at it very harshly. And I like to protect myself like that. Like I
Totally.
like to render out as many passes as I can, matte passes. Like let me just like.
For me,
I'm
that's
not-
such a headache, and my version of protecting myself is having more like machines so I can render faster. Yeah, exactly.
And so we adapt to what
our
to
jobs
the,
are.
No,
Yeah.
we adapt to the tool
okay.
that we use, right?
That's true.
So the tool that you use, it's not super great at rendering out AOVs and passes and getting all nitty gritty with that shit. It's easier just to fucking re-render it if you have like 5 more cards.
Right.
But for me, and being an Arnold or Redshift artist, like I would much rather just like not paint myself into a corner and like give myself a back door, and my back door is a mat for everything, or maybe crypto mat, or whatever it is that I need to do. It's not that I'm like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm like rebuilding the beauty in my comp. Like that's not what I'm doing. I'm sweetening, and then I'm using mats to fix. Like that's
right.
For me, I feel it like limits my creativity. Like if I'm doing the color in After Effects, then I'll actually I won't be viewing it from the same lens. If I'm looking through, like using it as a viewing LUT, like pulling in LUTs into Octane and changing the color around, that'll affect my decisions while I'm in 3D. So
but what if the client comes back and says like, hey, you know what, that grade that you did, I'm not really feeling it. Can we try something warmer?
Right. I guess I don't usually receive those kind of
I think
notes.
you get a lot more creative freedom in what you're doing.
I do. Yeah, I almost never get color notes, and like, yeah, if like, and it's funny because I used to do tons of color grading jobs where I would be taking in all this log footage and determining the look, and for that it made perfect sense to have like unadulterated footage, but I kind of view myself as a DP that really just wants to bake in the look. They're like, I know what I want this to look like, and I'm just going to go for it right here.
Because your clients are relying on you to make those decisions.
I'm super indecisive.
Right.
I'm super indecisive, so like I change my mind about as much as like.
And yeah, and if I do change my mind, then I am fine to like. It's usually the end of another day, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna render this overnight, and no big deal. Like every night is an opportunity to kick off a really big render, and so it just doesn't feel like it's slowing me down that much to work that way. In fact, it would slow me down a ton more to work with a bunch of passes and mats. Like I use mats when they're necessary if I want to do like transitions, or if I know that this character or whatever it is needs to, I don't know what it is. That's how often I do.
But do you grade at all in? Do you do
Almost
any grading
never.
at all?
And I used to do tons of like I'm fluent in DaVinci Resolve. I used to do tons in After Effects.
Yeah, I've seen you do DaVinci Resolve, dude. You were all over it.
Yeah, and like, but for me, it just like with CG for whatever reason, it feels like it rips up the image, or it doesn't feel quite as right to me. And I don't know. I do more color work in lighting. I'm like, I want to change these lights to make the color that I want. And then I'll put a LUT over it that will kind of constrain the color palette and create more of the look I'm going for, and play around with different LUTs, and then also play around with the exposure, the gamma, the saturation, all these things. All these color grading tools basically exist in Octane already for me. So I feel like I can get the majority of the work done there. And almost never.
That,
Yeah.
I think
I
it
don't know.
sounds like you are a special case. Like I don't I don't run into anybody that doesn't get notes on stuff, that doesn't like
I get
I
notes
don't
on
know.
stuff, but it's almost never on the color. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah, very rarely. And like I don't know, I'm doing like a weird mirror box job right now, and for certain things he was like he wanted to boost the exposure, but it was things that was like the whole room was too dark, and we had to like fully. It's almost always we have to fully change
Right.
the shot. It's never something that I can solve in comp,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's been
Yeah.
that way for me for like the past 6 years.
Well, if you like, if I had in my entire career like the ability to just like, oh fuck it, you know, I'll just re-render it. Like, of course you're gonna pick that. Like, right? Like that's like,
Yeah.
I don't wait. I don't have to do anything. The computer will just like do it for me.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's almost
Yeah.
like a lazy decision. It's like, okay, you know, I'll let the computer do all the hard lifting here, you know. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's to me, speaking as someone that's indecisive, that I sometimes like to like if I make an image for GSG to like promote a product, I might make that image and like sleep on it, and then I'll wake up the next day and be like, nah, I want to tweak it a little bit, and I'll just
Totally.
jump into Fusion and like tweak it or whatever. I don't necessarily just jump right into re-rendering, and I would argue that the reason that I make that creative decision is because I'm not using a spectral renderer that gets me to that place that I want it to be right off the bat.
Right.
Right. So
Makes
if
sense.
Arnold,
But
like-
I also, sorry.
no,
No,
go
go
ahead.
for it, man.
Yeah. Okay. Internet seems to be better now.
Good.
So I
Hooray.
have the feeling a lot of those artists are using Octane to do their work as they go and light and render and do their labs and stuff like that inside of the render. So I have to chime in and say that I'm doing stuff very differently. I'm rendering out EXR files all the time, and I do light passes and stuff like that to light stuff inside of the comp later. So I'm trying to get the best possible output, of course,
Right.
with my lighting first, but I leaving open the possibilities to change the lighting and some other stuff as masks and mats. So
Yes,
I have to
that's
also
exactly. You and I
Yeah.
work
I have
almost
to think
exactly
a
the
lot
same.
more on right. So like I don't render out a shitty render and then trying to make it good later in comp, of course.
Right,
I'm
right,
trying
right.
to get the best out there and then sweetening it, like Chet said. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So Octane is capable of all those things. I'm just making sure that the picture is not painted in the kind of way that people say, oh, Octane, it's like you have to have a vision and get it out there,
Totally.
and then it's done. So you also have the possibility to do comp work
Yeah.
there, and
That's true.
of course it's a lot more limited than in what you can get in Redshift in terms of like clown mats and but it has
They've got puzzle
other
mats.
options
Yeah,
I
like
love
puzzle
that.
mats are
I
really
love that
good.
name.
yeah. Clown mats.
It's we called them RGB mats, but like when I
Right.
first heard them called clown mats, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
It does look like a clown. Yeah. That's funny.
We're getting.
Yeah, but you
yeah.
also have cryptomat and stuff like that, so you could use also a lot of
Right.
flexibility in the side of
Cryptomat is
Oh,
great, but holy shit, does it slow your comp down?
Oh yeah.
Like it slows it down
That's true,
so
that's true.
That's another
much.
thing. Bigger file sizes, like yeah, all that stuff does get really
Yeah.
cumbersome when you're, and like when I'm rendering like these jobs I've been doing for concert visuals, a lot of them, it's like 16 minutes worth of content at 4K, and like all
Yeah.
those image sequences just really start to, yeah, bog things
Yeah,
down.
that kind of leads to that question. I think Nick on Facebook had asked actually twice, and is there anything that you can do if you're like working in 32-bit to make things go faster in
Don't work
comp?
in 32-bit.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
Work in 16-bit.
16?
Half
Well, you
bit.
can
Half load.
Half load.
use good compression. Yeah, half load and DVB-A or something like that. I noticed
Yeah.
that you can make your EXR files smaller than TIFF files if you're using the right compression, and it's actually lossless, but it's not that bad. I never encountered a
No.
problem using it, even if I do heavy trading.
I think
Yeah.
the majority of people that aren't really familiar with it think that they need to render out full 32-bit float uncompressed, and like that's not the case. You can render out
Right.
16-bit half float. I prefer, like, I did a whole slew of tests. You can check them out on
I
Grayscale
remember
Gorilla
this.
Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And like,
DPX was the fastest one.
yeah, DPX was the fastest like image sequence that's like 10-bit like color, but like
Right.
EXR flavor, I think the fastest was zip S in oh God, dude, I can't remember, like 16 like scan
Yeah,
lines or something.
yeah, it's 16-bit
Just look it up.
scanline.
Yeah.
Go look up your own
That's
tutorial.
I know, that's my life right now,
Right.
bro. Like, I think I did that. Like, oh
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
there
But
there are some quirks specifically with Redshift. Some passes in the AOV manager don't like being output at half float, like motion vectors and world UVs. It just straight up does not output the right information if
World
you're
World
Just have to
UV.
get them out as
or
32-bit.
sorry, world normals, or UVs as well.
Oh, I've never ran into that. That's interesting.
In the Slack, there was like actually the last like day or two, Ben Carmelli, he was doing this like flag. I think Liam's also been battling with like trying to output a UV pass so that he can retexture like I don't know flag or something in After Effects, and
Mm.
that bug in Redshift reared its head.
That technique, that idea has like always been like the holy grail. Like it's never worked right.
Right.
You know, like I've come across like at least 10 jobs where we're like, oh, let's just like replace the texture with a UV pass, and it never looks right. Like I don't
Yeah.
know what it is. Like I feel like nobody's solved that yet.
I've seen it done once, like from that Fox branding spot by, who was it, like Dan Pierce or
Dan
something,
Pierce?
where they,
Yeah.
where they like brought in, they used that old ass like After Effects plugin by the people that make
Oh
RSMB.
yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Is it FTUV?
Yes.
think
so.
Yes, I know what
No,
you're talking
no.
about. Yeah, it's the RSMB people.
I always had the feeling that if you do something like that, you would have to render like double resolution and then
Yeah.
comp the texture and then shrink it
I think
down
it's-
to get
Is
the
it
anti-aliasing
is it
and stuff.
remap?
It's Remap UV.
Yeah.
Remap UV. Because
Yeah,
it's the
'cause-
revision effects or whatever.
Yeah.
Raph is exactly right. It was always the sampling. Raph is right. Like it's always the sampling on that looked weird because you're not getting the super sampling. It's just like literally just like warping it in some
Right.
weird cheap way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but Ben Carmelli, he did post an interesting video on Twitter today, sort of outlining. I think he comps in Fusion. I want to say it was Fusion because I didn't recognize it as being either Nuke or After Effects. And like, if you're in the sort of like sports graphics where it's like, yeah, it's 3D, but it's like this isn't groundbreaking visual like quality. I think you can get away with a lot of that sort of stuff, like rendering out your crypto mat or your clown mats, and then doing stuff like world normals or object UVs to retexture stuff. That stuff is interesting, but I've personally never been taught it, so I wouldn't know how to like implement it in a production.
If you've
It's
ever played
also
around with
easy
like,
to
sorry, go ahead, Raph.
It's also easy to break your realism with that if you're going for that. So
Right.
because of course if you're changing your texture, the texture and the reflection is still the old one, for example.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. It kind of requires its own way of thinking, but I think if it's the sort of job where like if you're in the sort of work environment where you only have time to render it once, and like that's it, like the job's due tomorrow, you've only got one shot to render it, and if the client comes back with notes, we don't have time to output a whole re-render. Like that's, I think, the only really place that workflow can live.
Right.
Which I mean, it's cool that there are so many options. We have so many different render engines and so many different plugins and stuff that, like, yeah, as artists, it's great that we have all of these options.
I wonder if Sorry. I wonder if a better workflow for that would be to export an alembic sequence and then retexture it in Fusion. That way you get the sampling, and that way you sort of like you bypass all that bullshit that you get from a UV pass where you have that sampling issue that Raph mentioned.
I like that
Yeah,
idea.
you would only need to have a diffuse kind of, and then you can overlay the shadows and reflections and stuff.
Yeah, just render it out with the full like beauty passes at that point, and then essentially that replaces your diffuse pass, and you could work that way pretty easily. I mean, I don't know the particulars. That might be like a limitation, but it's an idea.
That sounds like a good tutorial right there.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
Let's go back to 2012 and re-export our full beauty rebuild.
What's great is Sean uses Fusion too, so we're stoked to like nerd out on Fusion stuff over at JSG.
Well,
one last thing. Tokyo Megaplex said earlier that you could do some strobing, like output a light pass and then do strobing in post. But that, again, that's the kind of thing that I would do just in C4D. I would just animate that, like right in C4D, be done. Just one pass at it.
A strobing? What do you mean? Like a strobing?
Like a strobing light. So
like
say you've got like just
lights.
a flickering light or like light strobing, like his solution to that would be doing that in comp, and having those light passes turn on and off, because then you can just cut it in After Effects.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Or Premiere even. You can just lay your image sequences or your, ProRes files over top.
Idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me,
I animated once like a corridor where the neon lights turned on, so I rendered all the single light passes and then just animated that in After Effects.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yep. I just delivered stuff for the LA Auto Show in November like that. It was like for the Mustang Mach-E, the electric Mustang, in this like science laboratory, whatever. And we had like strip LED lights, and then we had these like blue neon laboratory things, and like I don't really know the AOV workflows to a T, so I probably could have used light groups and stuff, but I just set up takes in Cinema for each, like basically every permutation of the light on and off.
Nice.
Damn, Billy, we could have saved you a lot of time.
Yeah, but like, it's fine. I got to the point where I could render, because it was a 9K by 2K frame.
Oh, shit.
And I had to animate that over a 4.5 minute timeline. So it wound up only being 60 frames to render, which my machine could handle over a night. And then in Premiere, I just treated it like an edit, basically.
Right. And that is the cool thing, is that it can make it a little bit, like that's the kind of thing where you're seeing a much more direct feedback in After Effects or Premiere with that animation.
Yeah, you can art direct
where you can art direct it
with music and everything else. Like
exactly.
You can use.
Yep.
Yeah.
For me, I still work ass backwards though. Like I go into Premiere, I cut in for like when I'm doing concert visuals, I'll put edit points where I want specific animation things to happen, because that's a really good feedback right there. I know I want to hit these frames, and then I'll take those frame markers and bring them into C4D. I'll just literally go back and forth between Cinema 4D and Premiere.
Very nonlinear.
And just drop in the markers. Yeah. And that way I know, like, okay, this is going to flicker properly to the beat, and I only have to render out one beauty pass. I don't have to render out those extra multi. And that's another thing about Octane, is that it does take up a bit more time to render out those extra passes. Maybe not I'm not sure about for light passes, but for like object buffers, for instance, there's an additional render time, to those passes, which is something that I definitely prefer about Redshift. Like, it's great that those things all just render at once. There's way more flexibility with the AOV system. You get your puzzle mats, you can have it output to multiple file types at once, whereas you can't do that in Octane.
Yeah.
In Octane, when I only need 3 mats at a time, I use the object color and turn it to red, green, and blue.
Oh, nice. So there's your puzzle mat. That's a good tip.
That's just one puzzle mat.
Nice.
It's there.
Yeah. Same in Redshift.
That's great.
Yeah.
I feel like what would be interesting is like if everybody went around and said what they wish their favorite renderer had.
I don't know if you...
I was going to ask that. It's on my list.
This giant list.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I've seen the list. He's had this list floating around for a while.
At the same time, I don't want to keep knocking Octane, because it's my favorite it is my favorite renderer by far. And like, I feel like we've said a lot of shit about Octane and not a lot of shit about Redshift or Arnold.
Oh, I can dunk on Redshift if we.
Yeah.
I'm
One.
in the Slack
Redshift's
every
I'll
day.
help you with that.
Yeah, Redshift's displacement is slow AF
Yes.
for me. Like, if you're gonna do like digital nature stuff and like all this real displacement texture stuff, like Octane, I feel is a much better match for that because it has that magical texture displacement.
My only counter to that is I just use megascans on everything, and I just
Nice.
write it all to proxies. And so
Okay.
because everything goes
Yeah.
out of core indefinitely.
Oh, interesting. So you can
I
just
don't-
have infinite geo by doing that?
I've thrown a terabyte out of core at a render
Holy
before.
Wow.
That's
And it
pretty
just-
amazing.
man.
It just
Proxy
doesn't
workflow
care.
is no joke.
Yeah.
So
All
like
right.
so
It's the same in Arnold.
you wanting a whole displaced like field of like muddy chunky
Yeah.
rocks, I'll
Yeah.
just scatter 4,000 copies of a megascans like
Wow.
the really like full deal
Detailed one.
and I just
How do you
scatter
do
the
the
ground.
scatter? Is it through X particles, or are you doing it through just a cloner?
Mograph?
Or what's the deal?
The matrix object is
Oh,
like
wow.
okay.
it's the dumbed down version of the cloner.
Yeah.
It's only creating point indexes like the way that
So you're
Octane.
totally bypassing the viewport that way.
Right. There's
Yeah.
very little viewport hit because it's just putting a point like in the Octane scatter. It just gives you like that little like kind of.
And then do you clone onto the matrices or what?
so
Yeah, it happens at render time.
yeah, you have the matrix object. You put a redshift tag on that,
Mm.
and then in the tag it reads those as particles, and then you tell
Mm.
geometry to be applied
Nice.
to particles.
That's
Yeah.
very cool. So that's like Redshift's version of Octane scatter.
And the cool thing
Arnold
was
is the same way, by the way.
yeah,
Cool.
the cool thing
Uses the
with
same
the
tech.
yeah, Arnold. The matrix stuff works it works the same way that all the random effectors and plane effectors and all, because it's Mograph. It's just built in.
Right.
Would you do that with Forester as well? Because when I
Yep.
did a project with Forester, I was using their multi-cloner, and like that was a
It's
little
junk.
bit slower.
It's absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool because it was easy to get some like. There's like a setting in there that allows you to do random color pretty easily.
Why didn't you
in
use scatter?
Redshift, but I'm talking about Redshift.
Oh, in Redshift. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
No, I use the matrices workflow for literally everything. Around like Christmas time, I did this like big ship thing with like a bunch of overgrown, whatever. Like if you go back on my Twitter a bit, you can see
Right.
there's one viewport screenshot where just the whole scene is littered with a rainbow of cubes, and that's just because I'm dropping matrices. I'm adding random color so that each little blade of grass or whatever gets like a 2% hue difference, because that's just a
Right.
shading attribute in Redshift.
I do love that Redshift can use that data to, like, you can just have one shader driving. It doesn't have to be instances. Like in Octane, it has to literally be render instances in order to use
Right.
random color, or to use, for instance, the Mograph color shader can pull in the field's color and then drive those instances that way.
Yeah.
But I like that Redshift, you can just have a single shader spread across multiple objects, and then you're using the user data, color user data, or whatever it is, to drive that randomness.
And you're not
So
screwing
I
your
think that's-
polygon count.
That's
Yeah.
exactly why I love Redshift and Arnold, because they do that really well and
Mhm.
really like
You
it's
sort of have to work around in Octane. So you
Yeah.
can use on non-instances the Mograph color to get your randomness from
Right.
there, and then bring that into the node tree, and then drive your whatever random stuff from. Like I've written OSL scripts for
Oh, cool.
offsetting UVs and
Right. See, yeah, I
offsetting
need to get.
U values and stuff like that. And if you of course, if you have instances, you can use the random color. But if you don't have instances, you can use the Mograph color to get your random values from
Oh,
there.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that the Mograph. Oh, that makes sense. But it still has to be then inside of a Mograph object,
Yes.
right?
That's what I meant with like working around stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And like, I guess does the fracture object work that way? Can you pull? Can you just use a fracture object, like not affect? Say you don't want a cloner. Say you've just got your objects normally set in Octane.
Yeah, the fracture
How do
object
you?
should give objects different colors with like the color shader.
Yeah. Cool. That's good to know.
Cool.
Billy, I had another
Oh.
random question about Redshift.
Shoot.
Do it.
So can it split out? So Octane can split out the daylight, and still use an HDRI. It can actually use two HDRIs. So it can use one for the back plate, or like a full spherical back plate essentially. And then you've got another HDRI that's contributing to the lighting, as well as the daylight rig contributing to the lighting. When I tried to do that same workflow in Redshift, it didn't work for me.
Okay, so I will admit that I don't use the Redshift daylight rig, whatever the equivalent thing is, very
Yeah.
often. When I do need to use like a parallel, infinitely long light, I usually use a Redshift infinite light. But just today I posted that render of that DeLorean, and there are two HDRs in
Okay,
that
cool.
scene working at the same time, where one is lighting the ground and one is lighting the car. One is visible to the backplate of the camera, and the
Okay.
other is hidden. So it's like
Okay, cool.
there is that flexibility using the includes and excludes
Right.
thing.
Maybe it's just an issue with the Redshift's daylight rig, that it kind of overrides the HDRI or something like that.
I think,
Yeah.
David, I think you're right. I think there is an issue with their daylight rig overriding any sort of sky domes that you have in.
Gotcha. Cool.
Cool.
But I wonder
Or,
if
yeah.
if you
Sorry,
want
go
to
ahead.
fight with the Redshift object tag, there is the matte visibility tab with a whole bunch of, where you can tell it to not be seen by camera, you can tell it to not be seen by the
Right.
photon GI. Like
Right. And that's
if you
the same
spend
kind of thing.
if
Yeah.
you spend enough time with those checkboxes, you might be able to get some magic combination where like it's in there and it can still contribute to certain elements of the scene or not. Like I just can't off the top of my head give you like, oh yeah, this and that, turn that thing off.
Right.
Right.
One thing I wish Redshift had, and Octane actually, are some better lighting tools. And like, I want light blockers, I want gobos, I want barn doors. Like, coming from like a live action background, like I love having that kind of control
Totally.
in my scene.
They're starting to build that into some things in Octane, like with Spectron, sorry. That's like they've got those are their primitive lights, and they've introduced a spotlight that does have barn doors on it.
Yeah.
But there are things like that I wish Octane had, like just Redshift's simple GUI implementation of having some kind of panels that show you which direction the light is pointed from a distance, or actually it's just the normals. It's like the four corners, like you see the normal direction, so you can tell where the light is pointed.
Yeah,
and like
by the
Octane
way,
doesn't have that. You have to go by like where's the Z-axis to see whether
Also,
your light
that's
is
stuff
facing.
like
crazy.
a light lister or a camera lister or something
Oh,
where
a
you
light
can
lister.
access all these settings
Yes.
in one.
Are you talking about the like lines that come off the four corners of a quad?
I am.
So the only reason those exist in Redshift is because of yours truly.
Oh,
So-
good job,
Oh.
Chad. That was something that made me jealous of Redshift when I saw
And
that.
the only reason that exists is because I liked what Peter did in Arnold, and I was like, I want that in Redshift.
Yes.
And so,
That's funny.
but yeah, those are the little things, though, right? Like
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the little things that make it a pleasure to use. And like
Right.
when I talk about the light filters and all that sort of thing, I want light filters in Redshift because I've got them in Arnold, and I want as close to the same experience in Redshift as I have in Arnold. And I want light blockers, I want gobos, I want these things, because ultimately, like when I look at the stuff that you're doing, Billy, like the automotive stuff, that stuff comes in so handy when you're doing that kind of work where you need to flag a light, but you don't want to actually physically move a plane, for Christ's sake. Like, or you maybe want to throw like an interesting looking gobo through the light, or maybe you have a very specific reflection that you're going for, and you want something to block that light, but you don't want it to be geo because that's like overkill. And like those types of lighting tools that are like in film production, because that's how they work in like RenderMan and feature films and stuff like that. Like we need those types of tools across the board as far as I'm concerned, like for lighting like that.
Yeah.
That's, I wish I had that in Redshift, man.
Yeah.
Every time I use it, I'm like, God damn it.
Every time I open the Redshift Asset Manager, I say, God damn it. Because it takes 20 minutes. I'm in
That is
Slack.
something that I
I'm
found
inside
Every time I
at
watch
least
the
once.
material preview in Redshift, I'm like, God
Yeah.
damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is something I didn't like about Redshift is how long it took to load all the materials.
Yeah.
All right, David, so now let's bitch about Redshift.
All right.
Now
I don't actually have that many. Like I've already said my main bitches about Redshift, which were displacement and
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
I
because
mean,
like the tool you use the most every day is going to be the one that you're going to
you
have the most
understand.
complaints about, right? It's
Right.
like you,
Oh yeah.
the length that you could go at in Octane, I could go at in Redshift.
Right.
Hmm.
So
true.
What about
Yeah, I'm
Arnold?
the same. I mean, honestly, the only thing that I could complain about is the speed. Like everything else is great.
yeah, I mean, I use Arnold enough in production to feel like I can form an educated opinion, and honestly, like I can't even like even the shading network being based on Espresso has little quality of life things that Peter has implemented that aren't in actual Espresso.
Yeah,
Like the
he
fact that you
wrote
can,
a light manager, dude. Like, has anybody looked at that? Like, show of hands. Like, has anybody looked at the light manager? This would have saved your life on that car render, Billy.
Mhm.
Like, it's a physical. Imagine like a spreadsheet for lights
Hmm.
with controls, like almost like an audio mixer where you have all your
Oh,
lights in a
that's
list.
nice.
Oh,
And
very
like you're just like
Houdini-like
What I'm
there.
mixing.
talking about with a light lister.
Yeah, dude, that's exactly what it looked like. The Houdini
That sounds
thing. Thank
amazing.
you.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of shit that Peter makes, and it's not like that exists in the Maya version of Arnold.
That would
He's
have been
just that
so
good.
useful. So like I just did a scene recently that was it was a lot of kit bash and like steampunk vibes, and I had over 200 lights or something
Oh my
in
gosh.
this scene
Holy shit.
because we're like going down these city streets, and I want to light every alleyway and like pick out these little details that I want to light. And
Man.
Octane kind of shits the bed when it gets to lots of little lights in a scene, and like then you have to start balancing the light samples, and you're like, oh well, I
Right.
boosted this one up, but I went earlier in the shot, and now this light that's reflecting down the alleyway is super noisy, and so I'm
Yeah.
like having to go through and ultimately
But a lot
compromise.
of renderers have problems with like many
Yeah.
light sources. There's not a lot of renderers that can easily balance those.
Right. I mean, supposedly
CPU
Redshift
renderer.
is the best. I mean, according to Already Been Shoot, like Barton says that, like they did their spot that was all grungy with that watch going through the city tunnels, and there were tons of little lights everywhere in the volumes. And he was like, "That's why we switched to Redshift was that specific
And
reason."
the lights count even if they're not in camera or they're like super far
Yeah.
away. So then you start
Yeah.
turning off keyframing to turn off lights so that they
Right.
don't
Yeah,
affect
you're like
things.
kind of
The samples.
managing it so you only have lights in a certain. Yeah, that's actually smart. I should have done that. I didn't think to do that time.
I wonder
I
if
do
you
that
could
with,
use
like,
fields to
geometry.
control it automatically with Espresso.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's
just
smart.
use the camera, thrust them, and then
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
turn
really
off
smart.
lights based on that.
Well, I think that's a big reason why a lot of feature films haven't like made the full plunge into GPU rendering, is
Mhm.
because they often have like thousands, if not more,
Totally.
lights, and like that's just not something it can do well. So it's not necessarily that it's like an Octane problem. It's a
Mhm.
GPU rendering problem.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, that
Look,
theme. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
one of the shots in Coco, the animated
Oh yeah,
movie,
I was thinking of that just now. Like thousands
Oh,
of lights.
yes.
Yeah, I want to say one of those shots where it shows like all of the villas and everything,
Yeah,
like
Mhm.
just
in the
the
dead,
whole
in the
whole
land
neighborhood.
of the dead. Yeah,
Yeah, I want to say that was like a million lights or something,
Yeah.
just absolutely insane. It's
I
like
think you're right.
it's like every project file any of us have ever made from our whole careers,
Right.
all in one visible in one shot.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the antique shop in Toy Story 4, right? Like that's
that was
Oh, I
so
love
good.
that. So good.
like you watch that and you're like,
You're
oh
like
my
FML.
yeah, you're like
Fuck me.
spent like 2 weeks just on that teapot alone.
Mhm.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it must have taken like so much RAM to get this thing into the
Well, yeah,
render file.
they use they're doing the whole XPU thing, which utilizes GPU and CPU at the same time, which is still sort of theoretical and sort of crazy. But yeah, that's like that's the crazy thing. Like their productions always push the limits of the rendering technology, and yeah, imagine how much memory it must have taken to load that. And I don't know if you saw that demo, but like if you are in the antique shop, and I don't know if I saw this at SIGGRAPH or NAB, I forget which, but I went to the Pixar event, and they showed it. They showed a camera inside the antique shop, and it's like on like a freaking teapot or whatever it was. They go out the door, and you see the street, like a little bit of the street that the antique shop is on. Then they take the camera. This is all like in the viewport. They go a little bit further out, and you can see the whole block, like the whole city block, with every store and marquee and sign and tree. And they go a little bit further. Now you're seeing like 3 blocks. Then they go way out, and you see the mountain and like the town in the center of the valley, and it's like
Crazy.
all live. It's like,
Wow.
what? It's like, what the fuck? That's crazy.
How is that even
Yeah.
handled?
I don't know.
Man,
It's different software. I
Yeah.
can't even. I,
It's all, well, yeah, Ben Carmelli.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Like,
USD.
it's all USD. It's all USD. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like loading it as it needs to in a very sort of intelligent way.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and we
Ben.
kind of have to do that manually. Like if we've got too much geometry in the scene. I mean, maybe not with Redshift with all the out of core stuff, but for me, I have to like if I've got too much geo, I'm like turning off objects that are behind the camera. You know, I'm creating that whole frustrum, thing, but manually.
Does Octane have proxies? Like, can you bake stuff out to an Octane
Yeah.
proxy?
Yes.
Like, have it
Sort
only,
of.
Yes.
so then it like reduces the memory footprint?
well, it's like an
Does
ORBX.
does that
ORBX.
actually? Yeah, the ORBX workflow. I don't think it's as robust by any
But it
means as
doesn't
Redshift.
support delayed load or something like that, I think.
I mean, the equivalent is basically like, say, in the example of like a forest made with forester trees.
Yeah.
You'd basically just have one instance of each tree and then use render instances with
Right.
the Octane scatter, which
Yeah.
is basically, it's like applying the geo at render time.
Yeah.
That's essentially the same thing that the Redshift proxy workflow that I'm using works, where I have, each copy of the tree one time loaded in the scene as a Redshift proxy,
Yeah.
and then those are being distributed at render time. The advantage of that is because that geometry and its included textures are being written into that proxy file, there's no at render time conversion of that geometry into the language that Redshift is expecting, because I basically already spent the time doing that when I wrote out the proxy file.
Right.
Whereas like you're not going to get that much performance difference just having that one tree there and using render instances
Right.
until you get to that massive amount of you're using the thing 100,000 times, and
Yeah.
if you're saving 2 milliseconds per thing, then okay, yeah, it adds up. Like great.
But isn't it more of so for Octane, it wouldn't be more of a speed issue? Like I'd be more concerned about the VRAM. That's the thing I'm always trying to manage, is not going out of core. And I don't know if baking things out to Orbex and bringing them back in, I don't know if that would save any VRAM. The best things to do to save VRAM are like Octane scatter or just using render instances everywhere. And one of my biggest gripes with Octane is that it can't use render instances of render instances. Like
Right.
you can't take a
Oh, yeah.
cloner set to render instances and then nest that into another cloner. And that
Yeah.
would save. And for like this project I did recently where I had like this whole big floating island scene that I created, I had Kit Bash and I had instances all in there that I made one hero asset of this island with all the steampunk buildings on it. And then I wanted to take that and instance that a bunch of times. And that's where things started to really fall apart. And I'm like, okay, now I have to sacrifice a bunch of these buildings or see if I can delete certain aspects of them. And that's where it gets really frustrating, is when you feel like the software is limiting you.
Right.
Yeah, you have to be really smart about stuff. You have to like first build everything in a folder or put everything in a folder that's an original, and then just go up from there. So, but yeah, it's like tedious because it's limited that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's also the trick of like setting the textures to float that only need to be black and white, so that you're not,
Right.
multiplying that texture 3 times for each channel kind
Right.
of thing.
That's
That only
crazy.
saves so much. And I wish that that's another thing that's on my list, is I wish there was a way that it could automatically read, is this a black and white file, or a color file? Like, is there color data here?
Yeah.
And then automatically assign the type so that we don't have to manually go in and try to manage that ourselves.
Yeah.
So wait, there's actually a penalty for
Yeah.
having
Color.
What?
Yeah.
That's
Takes up
Say
takes up
say you're
more.
using a bitmap in your if you're using a bitmap in your roughness channel that's completely grayscale, you should set it to float instead of RGB because you're only
Yeah.
using 1/3 of the
but
VRAM.
it
Yeah.
Right.
and that's been proven. Like that actually has
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
impact.
Oh, it has a
Because
really big
Yes,
impact.
because
yes.
Yeah.
you can read the VRAM load in
Yeah. You can
the
see it go down when you change it.
Yeah, Aaron
Mhm.
Of
Coverett
course,
does
it
that all the
depends on
time.
the size of your texture.
Hey,
So if you have an
Jules, if you're
8K
listening, fix
texture,
that
it
shit.
does like a lot of has a lot of difference on the VRAM.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or even
So
just something that like if it could scan the scene and look at everything that was being plugged into like a spec or a roughness
That's what I'm
or a
saying.
bumper, like
Yeah,
yeah,
those things
I
don't
feel
need
like
color data.
Yeah.
right.
so that's a perfect thing. Like Arnold has that. I don't know if Redshift has that. Honestly, I don't know, but it can predict. It knows whether to set something to linear or sRGB based on what component you're plugging it into. I would think that there's a way for Octane to be able to examine, at least predict what's most likely going to be a black and white float, and like
Hmm.
at least set that for you. Like there's
Mhm.
got to be a way for that
That's
to
what I
happen.
was saying.
Fernando is saying that
And
it's 4
Fernando says it's
times.
4 because we're forgetting the alpha channel. Yeah.
Oh yeah, duh.
Yeah, 4
Well,
times the
I
amount.
suppose
So that's why I don't use this renderer. It's ridiculous. Come on, guys.
Well,
You're making
Well,
me
it's
pay for
just
the alpha
things you
channel?
need to know.
yeah.
I'm not paying for the alpha channel.
The only thing that I ever used that ORBX kind of proxy thing for, by the way, was I was working on a project with Raid Zero, and like he was working on the office that this scene was in that I was working on, and so I'm working on the little scene on the desk, but he's working on the office. I mean, you could do this with XREF, I guess too, but it worked a little bit better this way. But it was so he could build the scene and just constantly replace that ORBX in Dropbox, and then as I'm working and rendering things, I see the office kind of like coming into shape because every time I reload my IPR, it's pulling in
that's
his
cool.
latest version of the file.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't know that worked
That's
like that.
cool. Yeah.
But it's not exactly a proxy, but you know.
All right, things to balance against the Octane hate. Here's some things I like about Octane.
Okay.
I personally prefer the nodes because they're not a bitch to plug into each other. Like I don't like the espresso
Yes.
system and going to each thing and then dropping down. It's a lot slower. I know it's more powerful, but it's slower. And then I feel like Octane has more like wild card creative features that are totally from left field, like Vectron, which is the fractal rendering built in. Like where did that come from? It's awesome. It can be used. Spectron, which is that's their, I guess that's not so much crazy, but it's their primitive lights, and it's kind of like a biased feature that they're integrating in to make things a lot faster. And like all their AI denoising and AI lights and AI upsampling that they're building in, and then stuff like Sculptron, which is totally WTF, but really cool. Like I don't know how I would even describe that. Like
Yeah.
crazy morphs that it can do between different sculpts and like time-based madness. And then I also really like their universal camera, which has like a bunch of weird aberration features. Not necessarily like chromatic aberration, but like weird
Not yet.
streaking, and there's finally like fisheye lenses, and I think that they're cool because they move towards those like photographic and interesting weird lens type things that you can do. Yeah.
And I have the feeling that it still has one of the snappiest light
Oh yeah,
years.
it does. It's snappier than Redshift for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, right? It definitely has the snappiest IPR for sure.
Oh yeah. Love that.
For sure. Nobody ever like says that. Like that's the thing that everybody agrees on. Like it's fast. We get it. Like it's
Yeah.
fast.
All right, y'all getting tired?
It's fast. It's fast and it's pretty though. Like that's the thing, is it's fast and it's really high quality. Like you said, it's a spectral renderer, so it looks really beautiful right out of the box. So those two things are probably the most important to me.
Yeah.
For the jobs that
that's-
I'm doing.
I think that's a really important thing to bring up. Like, and anybody that's listening, everybody has a different take. Everybody's got a different point of view on it, right? And so you're all I get asked this question every time I go to do an event. Like people are always asking me like, what render should I use? What do you use? And I always say like, figure out what your criteria is. What do you rate? Like what's your most important 3 things?
Right.
And that will help you make that decision. And I think that you can't look at what we say. You have to kind of look internally and be like, well, what do I value? Do I value speed over everything? Like, do I make like sort of like non-photoreal surgical tool renders, and like I don't really care about
Yeah.
it looking super cinematic? Then you're going to go one direction. If you are interested in like, I do super heavy shot-based stuff and like it's got to be deep, like you might go one direction. I do concert visuals and like David's saying, like stuff like he does, then you're going to go a different direction. And it's really about like, what is your list of priorities?
Yeah.
Is it?
But
And,
in
like,
this sense, this panel is a good starting point because we have like lots of different interests here.
Yeah.
I'm doing small realistic scenes, so I rely on a path tracer that is really capable of like high ray depth and stuff like that with fast preview. But I'm not doing a lot of big scenes where there's like where it would fill up my VRAM or something like that. So you might want to use a different render on that.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I am doing a lot of those scenes, so Octane can be frustrating sometimes. But yeah, I mean that's another thing, is it's really great to learn more render engines, because then it does make you more hireable for certain jobs.
Yeah.
Like certain studios will be gravitating towards a specific render engine, and you want to be able to say, yeah, I can use that. I can work in that language. And once you learn
not only that, it's like also the technical skills you learn. You can apply that to other engines too.
Definitely
so
true.
It's
Yeah.
like you said, learning a language. If you learn one language, you have all the words in one language. But if you're learning 2 and 3, you're having like sort of Latin roots and stuff like that down. You can apply it to other languages.
Yeah,
Definitely.
The first engines I learned was Mental Ray and V-Ray, and so the DMC sampler and unified sampling is the language that I know. So that's the language Redshift runs on. The 3 years when I used Octane, like first getting into GPU, I always felt like my hands were tied behind my back personally, just because there was a language that I knew that I couldn't tell the software to use. And so once the Redshift Alpha came out, I was, all over that. And the fact that I'm constantly bouncing between this, I'm not going to say that I can render at a photoreal level, but like I'm trying to get there, or I'm in the exact opposite direction with the shorts that I do with my, my friends at the office. And the fact that I just get to use one render engine to do both of these means that, when I did the car a year ago with Ash, and I taught myself a bunch of user data attributes to save myself time, I can still use those things to make cartoony things when I work with my friends, and I can set up controls. Being an artist who's proficient with Espresso, oh great, that's all the same language. So Redshift's the tool for me.
Cool. Well, are y'all tired enough at this point? We've gone like 2.5 hours.
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, we could
somebody
probably go on forever, but yeah, let's.
Right.
Yeah.
So Kent in the chat, yes, I updated our what render you should choose blog post that's live right now. I'll have Sean throw it in the chat.
Sweet.
Yeah. What the hell's that?
I don't know.
Somebody's getting their laundry on.
That's a cat.
Oh, it's a cat? That's awesome.
Sorry.
I was like,
Yeah.
I was like,
Sorry.
Those crazy cats, man.
crazy cats.
like,
Wrong.
yo, Billy, I don't know what you're doing, but I got to take a shit.
Basically.
You're live streaming? Cool. Perfect time. I love those cats, man. Are they getting... How old were they when you got them?
I got them at a year and change. They'll be 2 in a month.
Are they still as crazy as they were before?
I don't get to pet them.
Still?
They don't like me. Nope.
Wow.
Jesus.
I don't get it. Wait.
I've lived with these cats for 6 months, and one of them I've never pet.
Wow, that is crazy, dude.
It's
Someday.
depressing.
God.
Yeah,
Depressing.
It's
someday.
depressing.
Man. All right, and let's we'll open it for like a second, see if there's any other questions before we wrap up here. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all of you for doing this. Especially Raph, who is, what is it, 5:30? Where you're at right now?
Yeah.
5:30 a.m.
Yeah, that's hardcore. You're
Yeah.
pulling an all-nighter.
True.
We
Trooper.
started at 3.
Yeah, sticking in there with us,
Yeah,
man.
that's crazy.
Appreciate it.
Like watching the Oscars.
Oh man. Yeah, I think we're gonna get out of here. Unless there's anything else. Tokyo says, any other renderers you have played with, Raph, that you want to check out? Because I know you're like super Octane. Is there anything else you want to, or like 3D Delight, or anything like that?
I haven't checked that. I only know that they just rewritten the whole render, I think, and it's totally new now. But lately I've come across a render that's called, now the name escapes me, what's it called? Centileo. And it's also a GPU renderer, and it uses the new nodes of Cinema 4D. So anyone who's in for an experience might check that.
Cool.
All right, cool. All right, I think we're gonna get out of here. Unless anyone else has anything. Chad?
I got a prize.
Oh yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I should probably give that out.
Yeah.
So, should I throw this code in the Skype chat, Dave, or what do you think?
What is it? What's the code for?
It's a coupon code.
It's a coupon code for everybody?
Yeah, for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, you
throw it
can.
in.
You can.
Oh,
throw
I
it
thought
in,
you were gonna do
Davis.
one of your patented like. Here's a trivia question, and
Oh
then
no.
yeah, I like that.
All right. So,
Well, I can still do that for you if you want.
so can I put?
But no, yeah, this is out to everybody. We're giving everybody a free month of Grayscale Gorilla Plus if you use this coupon code on checkout.
Should I put this like in the chat directly, like in the video?
Yeah,
Does that
wherever-
work? Okay.
Wherever you want,
Cool.
man.
I'm gonna put that right in
You
here.
know, all these jerks are gonna like use the code and download all the free assets like Everyday Material Collection. And
Don't tell
Jerks.
them.
don't
Yeah.
tell them.
Well, that's all good. They won't
That's
get
all
the new
good.
stuff that's about to drop.
Oh
Yeah, that's true.
snap!
Oh snap!
There you go. It is.
how we do.
That's in there. Render talk.
Yeah,
That's
so
it.
Render Talk is the coupon code 30 days free. So enjoy.
Awesome. Cool. We really appreciate that, man. Can't wait to see. Well, at least David and Chad, you'll be at ABC DFWC4D here in a couple weeks.
That's true.
Yeah.
ABCD FWC4D.
That's gonna be a lot of fun. So many
It's a
people
lot
are
of
coming.
letters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's too many letters.
It means something though, which I like.
You're definitely
Awesome.
going to want to come out. Forget about the coronavirus. You can get a cheap flight because of it. Come on down to Dallas. Check
Oh,
it out.
nice. Too late, though. I
Mograph.com/events. Oh, yeah, for
I
you.
already booked the flight and it was expensive. Though
Yeah.
I actually used my miles, so it
Oh,
was
yeah.
going to be real expensive. But
Yeah,
yeah.
cool. Well, there you have it. We've, I think we will be at NAB for sure. I will be.
Well, as long
Unless
as,
it gets canceled.
No.
as long as NAB is at NAB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Right.
will happen, dang it. Definitely. Yeah, right now they put out a statement. It's still happening. That's a long time from now.
Companies are dropping out like flies.
I know,
See?
man. I'm gonna be really disappointed if that happens. I was really looking forward
Me
to
too.
that. We'll
My
think
wallet
positive.
will not be disappointed, but I will be.
Yeah. Well, either way,
Well, my wallet's already sad. I already booked from NAB to off.
Oh,
I've already
damn.
paid
Oh.
I've already paid for all of that.
Jeez.
is
Yeah, it sucks.
is
This
South
is gonna
by
be my first time in Europe.
South by's not
amazing.
fully canceled, is it? Is South by really fully canceled?
I don't know.
Man. Well, you know what? We're still having DFWC4D, so come see us.
I hope off happens because I'm helping on the title sequence with G-Monk and all that.
Oh, snap. See?
Ooh.
Snap.
All right. There you have it. We've solved what the best render engine is.
IRA.
Yeah.
Iray.
Totally.
Pro render.
R.I.P.
Maxwell.
Yeah. So we're going to get out of here.
Didn't touch on that.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Check us out on the interwebs. If you want to find Mograph, we're usually at mograph.com, all spelled out. Everybody else want to give a shout out to where they can be found online? Start with Raph.
Well, the internet address is there. You can also find me on Facebook at Silverwing-VFX, or you can also type in my name there.
Cool.
So it's not hard to find me, I guess.
All right.
you can find me at ariavisuals.com. That's with 2 V's because the 2 V's form a W, just like my name, which sounds like it would be Ariew, but it's actually Ariev.
Are you going to the mall later?
This is not confusing at all.
No.
Also, you can find me in just search for EJ and you'll find me.
There you go.
iDesign.com.
There you go.
Or School of Motion, whatever. Get out of here.
And then I'm just gernge.com, Gernge, or just my name anywhere, Billy Chitkin.
Is there
Saint
a story
Gurge.
related to your name?
Oh, yeah. In 2004, it was the name of my first character in World of Warcraft. When I was
okay.
13.
That's amazing.
Yep, that's all it is. It's just a
Everything
made-up
relates
word.
back to video games is what it is.
Nice. I'm Chad Ashley. You can find me at grayscalegorilla.com.
Cool. All right, well, we're going to take you off.
No, now my alarm is getting off.
Oh, no, it's morning time.
You gotta get wrapped up.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Harp music.
Oh, man. Well, we'll let you wake up then. We're going to get out of here. One thing when we're leaving, you know, on the TV news shows when everybody's like talking to each other, but the microphones are muted at the end? Let's just pretend we're doing that as the music plays as we finish up the stream. All right.
Sounds
Talk
great.
to you later. All right, stand by, y'all.